Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Jerry Thompson, joined as always by Brian Gottlieb. And once again, we are recording live in our Discord for all those wonderful folks who are also our patrons. If y'all want to be part of this, get the cast day or two early, I don't know, go to patreon.com/Arena Decklist, I suppose.
It's not even a day or two early. We're so bad at everything we do. We're kind of bad and we're kind of good because our awesome support staff turns around our podcast so quickly. We get the editing done. We get it posted. Like last time, it was like 6 hours from the live recording where it actually hit the internet.
6 to 48 hours, somewhere in there.
There is a big gap, but you get it a tiny bit early, and you also get some pre-show chats and all that fun stuff, and we hang around afterwards and answer some questions. So all those boxes get checked.
It's almost never been more than 24 hours of turnaround time. I was just giving Connor like some leeway in case he ever needed it ever in his life.
That's nice. I am sure he appreciates that.
But yeah, this week is kind of weird, I suppose, because we're going to be talking about Modern, and based on the chatter that I've seen, the streams that I've been watching, like seeing where people are diverting their attention, it seems like Historic is the thing that people are most interested in, like that or Limited, but I'm going to skip over that for now, I guess.
Just for now, because we got some news today.
Okay.
Some exciting news.
Okay, so May 8th and 9th, there's an Arena Open that is Strixhaven sealed. Yay.
Jerry's super excited about it, and I'm saying it right now. Jerry hasn't agreed to it yet, but I'm saying it live, so he's got no choice. We'll do another sealed episode. I'll play some sealed deck, and we'll figure out Strixhaven. I'll take a moment to pat ourselves on the back. I think we did pretty well with call time and identifying like the proper way to play that sealed format. And most people got to the same conclusions we did around the same time. So I'm not going to make it sound like we were the sole source of information if you were looking to do very well. I think a bunch of people figured it out independently.
Oh, of course. I mean, there's plenty of good sources of limited information out there.
Right. But I was still happy that we were able to provide that to our listeners. And I think we can do that again for them.
Go watch Sam Black stream and consume all his content.
I think that's an excellent idea, but we're going to do it too because I like doing it, and I think Jerry doesn't like it, and I don't know why I feel this way because I love you like a brother, but something about forcing you to do these things that I know you really don't want to do makes me really happy. So, honestly, I pretty much feel the same way about my real brother. So that all checks out.
Okay. Yeah, you just have a weird familiar bond, I suppose.
I guess so. Yeah.
I don't really like it.
Sorry, you're trapped now.
Different times, man. Different times. I think I would have way more energy to explore all these different formats and do all of this extra work, but instead I'm just like I just kind of want to like sit on my couch. Like I can't really sleep much these days. Although getting vaccinated last weekend helped me with that. I was like super lethargic and was able to actually sleep for like 8 hours in a row. It was great.
Oh, like as your side effects from the vaccine?
Yeah. It was super light, but that was the one thing that hit me. At least like I think it was part of the vaccine, because I haven't been able to sleep that well in months, almost a year probably. So
well, I'm glad that worked out. That's an unexpected bonus of being vaccinated. I also had my first shot. A little tired the day of, but I woke up really early to go to the place where it was like a walk-up clinic basically. So I was up at, I think 6:30 or 7, which there's no way I went to bed before like 4 or 5. So it was not much sleep. So afterwards in the afternoon, I also felt very tired, but I was very sure it was probably just about waking up early and not so much the vaccine because everything in the days following was completely fine.
Well, you want to hear something nice about my sleep schedule? My appointment was at 3:20 p.m.
Okay.
Which meant that I had been up for about 13 hours at that point.
Yeah. Okay. That's very strange, but yeah, sure.
So yeah, got poked, came back, went to sleep. It was great.
Nice. Well, you're in the range where you're starting to like wrap around to almost having the quote unquote normal sleep schedule again, right? Where you're just eventually going to be waking up at like 7 a.m. ready to start the day, cup of coffee in hand.
Yeah, I'm kind of on that. It's like I either wake up at like 3 a.m. or 7 a.m. depending on when I go to sleep now.
Right. Yeah, I know how that variance works.
Which is not great. But anyway, the week after the sealed open is also the Strixhaven qualifier weekend, which I think I checked and it said standard. That is correct. It is standard.
Sure. Okay, standard.
Which is weird and interesting because there hasn't been a lot of traction on standard, and there hasn't been a lot of reason for people to do that. And historic has a bunch of shiny new things, So I actually haven't seen that much innovation in standard. And going through the Magic Online results, obviously people show up for the challenges. They bring their best decks. There's some innovation, but like looking at the leagues, it was like 4 decks and 6 decks or something.
Yeah. The leagues were pretty barren. And honestly, that's what I wanted to do for this show. I really wanted to do a standard deck dump. Although I guess if you gave me like the ability to resculpt the world, I really would have rather done a historic deck dump. I think that's where the most interesting stuff is happening, but we don't really have stuff to mine for that. We could talk about the events that happened over the past weekend, and it's certainly interesting things happened there. Rogues taking a first place in the hands of Yuta Takahashi. Fairy's Master just goes ahead and adds Brainstorm to a very solid looking deck and makes it into what sort of feels like a great deck.
Memory Lapse
that was
2.
Really cool. Yeah, Memory Lapse 2. Great point. Yeah, two really big adds to that archetype, and people now getting to feel a little bit of standard in their historic, which I think is fine-ish. Like that's sort of what historic is supposed to be. I don't know that it lasts forever, but
that's like the outlier though.
It is the outlier. There's some degenerate stuff going on. Some of that, which you are at least in part responsible for, going on with Jeskai Ultimatum type decks, which you wrote about on Star City. So all kinds of things happening there, but there's nothing to really farm to be like, this is the metagame. We could give you shots at it, but I think a lot of times when we do that, and I think we fell into this trap in the pre-Strixhaven era, we gave you our expected metagame. Like if people are rational actors, this should be what they are doing. People are not always rational actors, and you may not end up exactly where it makes sense to end up because people have their preferences and their predilections for certain decks. And I think some decks are being held on to a little too firmly right now. Some decks probably need to be retired as things shift, but that'll all get played out as we do more and more tournaments. And I think we're just better off waiting for that to happen before we're talking about it.
Going into the Pro Tour like events, the championship events, I think that we can make those calls. But for something like a qualifier weekend, it's always just anything goes. And Yeoman 5 actually took his shot at doing a similar thing for historic this week. Go look at his Twitter account and his content on TCG Player and stuff like that. But it was basically just like, decks that he thinks are going to show up, decks that are overplayed, decks that are underplayed, etc.
Typical Yeoman delivery, which I really appreciate. And I think
his approach is good.
Yeah, I think it does a good job of setting the stage for the format. So I will second that. Go check that out. As far as standard goes, we're going to get a first decent look, I think, this weekend because the SCG Tour Online is coming back. And I believe that event is standard this weekend. So I'm going to write about that. I'm going to cover it. I'm going to look for anything interesting happening there. Certainly, you can check out those deck lists too and see what's going on in real time, although my article does it pretty close after the completion of that tournament. I basically wait for the tournament to finish. I jam it out and send it over, and then it's up Monday morning. So I'll have a breakdown of what's going on in standard for sure.
I got to say, out of all the spam or spam adjacent emails that I get, most of which I just ignore for a week, it's like those are the only emails I get these days.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the week or whatever, I'll just go through and clear out 100 emails. But the emails from Star City where the most recent one I got was just like, you qualified for the first invitational in 2020. So like, here's some free entry, like come play in these tournaments or whatever. I'm like, like, it's like not that bad,
It sounds really nice in the moment. Like, a Magic tournament. I could get excited for it. I could chat with my friends and see what's happening.
So the more they email me about this stuff, the more I'm just like, that doesn't sound that bad, But I actually have to just, buckle down and join one of the events. So it'll happen one of these days.
That is the final step, and I think we are marching ever closer to you and I participating in these things again. It's not that I don't want to participate in them. I just don't have a reason to. And my wife has off on the weekends and she works during the week. And if I'm going to give up my weekend, like I want a good reason to. And I think I can gain just as much from observing the tournament as playing in it, if not more, quite frankly. Like I am more focused on what's going on broadly. So often I'm just like, well, for what I do and the content I create, I think it's just better for me not to play this and to pay attention and to take my time off and enjoy it and then come back and break down the stuff with some 2020 hindsight, basically.
Yeah, that's mostly what I like doing too, is observing. And then if there's something that is a gap in my knowledge or like a thing I just don't understand, well, then, I'll get on ladder and play until I figure it out.
Yep. Yeah, that tracks. Before we head into this modern league, which I am excited to talk about because there's some neat stuff, like maybe just a quick check-in on both formats, what you would play. I think that would be a really useful thing to provide to our listeners if they have either a historic or a standard event this weekend.
For standard, I'm not sure. I've still been working on like these Rakdos things, but haven't quite gotten it figured out. For whatever reason, there was a trend also in the standard events on Magic Online this last weekend for like Sultai Yorion to just play more Yorions and card advantage things and not play Ultimatum.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things like Callous Bloodmage showing up where, we kind of poo-pooed on the card. It's like a fine card, but not power level that you would expect for standard. I guess when you're up to 80 cards, you're trying to Yorion things, it kind of makes sense. But like cutting Ultimatum for that stuff, I don't know. That seems wild to me.
Seems wild to me as well. Ultimatum it feels like the reason to do those things. And it's nice to have that easy click, I win button. I always look for those things, and Ultimatum is still functioning as that. So I would still be playing Ultimatum if I was playing Sultai. In general, I don't want to play Sultai. I think it's like fine-ish. I wouldn't fault you for that choice. I really don't have strong opinions on standard. I continue to work on all the Plum decks. I continue to do well with them mostly. Nothing feels broken, but it all feels competitive. And it keeps me pushing and trying to figure out how I can push them into the broken realm. I don't think I'm there yet, but if the metagame gets really pinned down, I think it's going to be a really good time for those type of decks because I can beat some things and I can shape my sideboard really hard to account for, if I know I'm playing a bunch of aggro matchups, it's very easy for me to find an edge there. But if I'm trying to cover everything, it's hard. And there's some decks that require some very specific sideboard tech. Like all of your sideboard slots are so spoken for. It's really hard to get cards that have utility in multiple matchups.
Well, that's because you play too many lessons.
My number of lessons has gone down. I probably was playing too many lessons for a while. But that's part of the problem.
The fourth pest summoning is probably a bit much.
It was. Look, that particular version, I still stand by it being correct, but I don't think that was the best version of plumbing. So I would look for a much smaller package these days for sure. But I still really like those decks. I still think they have a lot of potential. But if I am playing something this weekend, it's either Teamer or is it with the same foundation, Goldspan Dragon into Alarin's Epiphany. I don't know that you actually still need to play green. I'm having success with the Magma Opus focused versions and just ramping a little bit more and playing these powerful spells because they are powerful. Having the 7 mana and 8 mana instance has been really good for me, and I've appreciated that. I've appreciated Galazeth Prismari as a way to get a little bit bigger, a little faster, which I think is important in this format. I don't know if it's just straight up better than playing green. I'm not going to say that with any confidence, but I do know I am certainly getting by with playing just Izzet, and I kind of want to keep pushing that further. So one of those two decks would have my eye for this weekend in standard.
Sultai's the litmus test. I think it's completely fine to play it. I would stick to what makes that deck good, and that is just focusing on the combo. There's, again, a lot of the moto lists are like Quandrix Cultivator, which is a fine card. Eureka Moment, that card's okay, maybe worse than Cultivator. A lot of the decks are like cutting Cultivate for those cards, which I don't agree with. I would much rather have the card that just gives you 2 lands than the random body. Mm-hmm. Professor Onyx seems solid because you can get Tybalt, Onyx, Vorinclex, and that's like a pretty solid package a lot of the time. So those updates seem pretty strong. Any sort of Teamer or Is It sort of thing, I think, is also pretty good. And Mono White is also solid with Spellbinder. Okay.
Yep.
And I like Mono Red's okay. It's fine. But I would much rather prefer to work on any of those other 3 decks.
Yeah. My interest is always going to be driven by what I like to play. So certainly I agree with you. I've spent a lot of time working on Plum decks and a lot of times working on these Izzet decks because they're more interesting to me than trying to figure out like the ideal Teamer list or the best Sultai list. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
As for historic, my couch deck, even though this is not a great play on mobile couch deck, has been Izzet Phoenix, and I think I have a pretty good list. It's definitely better than like 50-50 matchups like we were kind of talking about last week. I think
we talked this deck down last week and it had a pretty successful first week out, it looks like.
So like I was just kind of like joking and going along with you, but it's like that's what I was working on, and I fixed a lot of the problems. I think that Stormwing Entity as your alternative threat to Arclight Phoenix kind of makes sense, but kind of doesn't, where either you're bringing back a Phoenix on turn 3 or you're casting Entity on turn 3. And it's like, wow, look at the consistency or whatever. But it means that you're consistently mediocre. And I think that's a lot of what we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And, Crackling Drake at the top end is completely fine. If you're going to do that, play a Maximized Velocity. I think that is fine. Sprite Dragon is a pretty bad card, but having something to do on turn 2 that then leads into turn 3, bring back your Phoenix, is where you want to be. So I have 3 copies of Sprite Dragon now. You absolutely do not want to flood on them. But as far as like a turn 2 kind of setup thing, when you're all rolled up for turn 3 and it forces your opponent to spend mana killing your thing, like a lot of people are just like, well, it just dies. Well, a lot of your stuff is just going to die. And the earlier you make them interact with you, the better.
Yep.
So Stormwing Entity has protection inherently from more things. Just like higher casting costs, 3rd toughness, etc. But they're both probably going to die to something, right? So I would much rather spend 2 mana to do it, not on my Phoenix turn, and then actually build towards that. And then in the super late game, you play that, you play Finale, like you're good to go, right? And I've also been trying 2 Terramanders, which are fine. It's another thing that you can just play early. It's probably going to die, but eventually something is going to stick. And then in the late game, it's very cheap to deploy. And in post-board matchups against control decks, it matters a lot when you have things like Memory Lapse and you want to like play a threat and hold open counter magic instead of like playing Crackling Drake and just being stuck there. So I think that deck is fine. It is kind of unwieldy to play on mobile, not as bad as some of the other stuff like, trying to play Omnath on mobile or whatever, but it's kind of wild. The Ultimatum deck is very powerful, very good. Probably should just stick to playing it in best of 1 and farming people there. And I don't know, it's like kind of cheating at that point. It's like really unfair, but I don't know, do what you got to do.
I don't really have any objection to what you're saying. I think one of the reasons Phoenix has done so well thus far is that people didn't adjust as much as they should to its presence. I think the more attention that's paid to it, the worse it's going to do. And I think it'll fall off pretty quickly if it ever becomes a problem. I would say the same thing for the Ultimatum deck. Meanwhile, I think these rogues lists look extremely strong, extremely consistent. They are particularly good at things that are trying to go big in some fashion. They're really good at controlling that. We talked about Cling to Dust being a very important card in this format. They have access to as many copies as they want to play. So, and I don't think they're super vulnerable to really being hated out in any kind of fashion. They're just consistent. They have extremely, extremely powerful spells. And those spells are propping up what is a really good backbone and a really challenging backbone to interact with for most decks. So very impressed by the early lists of rogues. If I had to play this weekend, I think that's what I would register.
Rest in Peace is good against them. They can obviously still beat it, but it does shut down a lot of their angles.
Do you think they have new directions to go, though, once they know they are accounting for Rest in Peace on a regular basis? Because I think it's pretty easy for them to shift gears and find another good like alternate approach in those scenarios.
It probably involves not playing Lurrus. And I don't know if that's like not playing it at all, or if you just side in some bigger cards and no longer have the companion. But yeah, they have ways around it if they actually care. They can also just Inquisition you or counter it,
Yep,
so It doesn't necessarily work out all the time anyway. And even if you're like, well, I'm mulligan to 6 or 5 in hopes of getting my Rest in Peace, and you do it, maybe you just die to a bunch of 1-power things, that's completely reasonable too.
Yeah.
One of the things about the deck is that Memory Lapse is just counterspell because of how often they just get in like the little mill shots, which is funny, but also kind of disappointing sometimes when you're like, well, I need to attack with this Soaring Thought Thief or whatever. And it's like, I kind of want them to redraw their crappy spell again, but
Right. Yeah. And if you don't attack, then it's completely written what you're trying to force them into doing, and they can do literally anything else and come out ahead in that scenario. So it's a little awkward, but I think you still take that just on raw power level.
Yeah.
Really awesome spell for them to have access to.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the things that I definitely did not think about in regards to memory lapse, because I always put rogues kind of at like tier 2, but with all the things combined, and especially how, there's like the Mizzix Mastery deck, for example, or even just like all the Torrential Gear Hulk, Indomitable Creativity stuff. It's like rogues is
big
prime.
Spells.
Yeah, rogues is prime to beat up on those decks. So that and memory lapse and brainstorm, it's like, okay, yeah, this deck is actually legit now.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, I'd be fine playing Phoenix. I think Rogues is certainly a better choice. Phoenix is just one of those things where you're like, well, I put all these, different threats in my deck that are good against various things, and this removal suite, and my sideboard cards are usually very focused, and then the metagame is not what you expected it to be, and you just kind of have no chance. Whereas Rogues, I don't think cares very much at all. So you have some spot removal, some discard, some counter spells. You're generally pretty good against everything as long as you account for, things like Gruul or whatever sort of collected company aggro deck is out there. I think that you'll be completely fine.
Yeah, along those lines, I saw a lot of green-white in the events over the past weekend. I think by default, I look down on these decks. I try not to, but always my first response is just going to be like, ew. Why are we doing this? But then I will eventually do my due diligence, play games with it, and start to understand why exactly we are doing this. Do you have opinions on green-white as it stands right now?
The disruptive creatures are all really good right now. And I think that deck is solid, but the things that don't look very good to me are like Lovestruck Beast, Llanowar Elves, the Great Henge. I think Company is very good, but I would kind of rather just have Thalia instead. So if you want to just splash Company, you can, but also I think that mono white is completely reasonable.
That'll be an interesting evolution to keep track of. I will definitely keep my eye on that.
Faceless Haven. Faceless Haven, still good.
Love the beatdowns.
Anything else for Historic that you like? You've mostly been messing around in Standard, I guess.
Mostly Standard, checking in from time to time, playing, occasional games on the ladder of Historic, but no real deep sessions or trying to unpack anything, more just keeping up with what everyone else is working on and shaping my opinions on that rather than trying to push a new way forward in the format.
Word. On to Modern.
Let's talk a little Modern. Are we doing the thing where we just skip the decks that don't have new cards? Is that our plan for this particular pass through? Or do you think things have gotten interesting enough that it's worth talking about them?
I don't think that we can skip every deck that doesn't have new cards.
Okay.
But for things that we have already talked about that don't have anything interesting, I think that we can skip over those. But there are definitely some decks in here that don't have new cards or don't have a ton of them that are pretty interesting.
Okay. You're in charge. You direct us where you want to go.
First up, Simo CR, Violent Outburst, Ardent Plea, Living End. So blue base with Force of Negation. We kind of talked about this. They're also the ones that have As Foretold instead of one of the Cascade cards. Like, these decks are cool. I like them. They're probably not very good, but whatever.
They're fine-ish. I do like how well this deck cycles now. I think every cycler at this point either costs 1 mana or less in the deck. And if you played any Living End, like the cost of cycling a 2 mana creature can be pretty damning. The fact that these have gotten so lean at this point is really cool. I think the things you're bringing back have upgraded over time. And, obviously adventure creatures like Brazen Bar are making the cut here. It's a big difference maker. Like being able to interact on 2 really does do a lot for you. So these decks continue to get better. They continue to probably not be good enough to push into tier 1, but this is a very different Living End deck than we were dealing with just a couple of years ago. This is a deck that can now interact with you and do some really meaningful things. So if there's moments like there was back then where Living End is really well positioned, maybe those moments look a little different now, but I think they're still there. I think there's still going to be a spot where you can just go, yes, this is the correct deck to play.
It's a little different though, because I think Living End decks back then, you had Fulminator Mage and would side in like Beast Within and maybe play Avalanche Rider. So it's like you could use that as a foil to things like Tron while also being good against, some creature decks or whatever. So now this one with Force of Negation is probably set up to be good against different things.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure exactly what that spread of things is, but
Well,
I do agree with your premise.
I would guess like combo setups, right? Spell-based combo is what you're hitting most damningly with Force of Negation, and then you're still good against creature decks just by virtue of having Living End. But it doesn't feel like these spell-based combo decks in Modern at this exact second are particularly vulnerable to just like getting hit with a Force of Negation.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that too. That's why I was kind of concerned. It's like, well, this setup isn't like great against Tron. It's not great against Control.
Yep.
Not great against combos. So like, obviously you're solid against creature decks, but like, what does this deck actually, just like farm basically? And I can't really think of that. It's just like solid against everything.
Yeah, I think that's a good assessment, and nothing wrong with that.
Somber Troll playing some Azorius Spirits with, I don't think we got a new spirit, right? I always have to check.
Nothing comes to mind.
Nah.
And I don't see any new cards in this particular list.
All right, this is a new-ish deck from Selfie Sec, who was the progenitor of Mardu Pyromancer. So obviously I owe, roughly thousands and thousands of dollars to this person.
Correct. Yeah, wait for that check, Selfie Sec. It's coming any day now.
And they're playing Sultai Midrange deck, some Noble Hierarchs, Icefang Quaddle, Snapcaster Mage Tarmogoyf, Mistress Bauble to go along with Companion Lurrus, also a Nissa Steward of Elements, which I think of as a 3-mana Planeswalker, but is sneaky and still counts for Lurrus.
Yeah.
So that's kind of cute. I don't know how good that card is. Like, I like this card a lot, but I don't think it's particularly great. And then just like some Clings, couple Village Rites, which is sort of weird, but discard, unearth, drown and lock.
Yeah, mostly what you would expect to see out of this style of deck. This is like the Grixis stand-in here, kind of, or the close Jond analog as well. I think is a fine comparison to make, except you have access to some meaningful counter magic, which again, if that was what I wanted in the moment, I think you could talk me into this deck. Like I like a bunch of what's going on here. And I even like the fact that it's still playing Tarmogoyf and it's doing that thing where like it will close out games early sometimes. I think a lot of these decks get caught in the trap of just being like, oh, I'm just going to play my value cards and I'll eventually get there. But this deck is going back to that old Modern standby of just I'll turn 1 Thoughtseize you, turn 2 Tarmogoyf, and occasionally that'll get the job done. I think that happens rarely these days, but I do like that this deck is sort of getting access to that. And then backed up with a little counter magic, you could talk me into playing a league with this deck. That's what I'll say about it.
Yeah, it's funny because there's a little bit more battlefield interaction or like combat interaction because the prowess cards are so good.
Mm-hmm.
But also Tarmogoyf will occasionally just get run down by those cards. And you do get outsized against things like Death Shadow and Scourge. So I can see the pros and cons of having Tarmogoyf, but I feel like there's got to be something better.
Yeah. Well, certainly the recent modern trends point to there being something better. We don't see much Tarmogoyf these days, and usually there's a reason for that.
We're seeing more than we did over like the last couple of years, but Modern also had a few periods where it was just kind of busted. So
nonsense. Yes, very true.
Next up, Delthar, Simic Infect. Saw some people talking about like the life gain pump spell, potentially trying to find a way to abuse that, but this is no new cards.
No new cards. I do like that life gain pump spell a lot, and I hope it finds somewhere to shine. It feels like you can potentially get returns on that are way above rate, but you're going to have to work for it, and you're going to need some good support cards to get there.
I saw it in a Modern deck. I believe it's in this league, but I didn't check.
Okay, I hope so. I hope we get to see it.
MTGO Bazaar 4, Selesnya Company, Heliod combo thing. These lists are super streamlined at this point. See a lot of people playing like Deicide and Erase. And, this deck has a Deicide in the sideboard. So this is what I think most people would consider to be the best deck currently. And that's saying something, especially since you're playing on Magic Online and it's sort of hard to actually execute the combo and everything. But this deck shows up a lot. People are respecting it to the point where they're playing cards that are like basically good against it and nothing else. So that it is popular, prevalent, very strong.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned, it's probably better than it seems to be right now, because it is getting that level of play on Magic Online where it's a little bit problematic. And I wonder what this deck would be doing if we still had our live Modern tournament circuit working at the moment. Would it just be absolutely dominating everything? And I think a lot of players naturally gravitate to this type of deck, and it being very good is only going to further force that action.
Yep. Angled Lufa playing Lantern. I saw this maybe like in the last 3 months or so. Maybe it was like 6 months ago even, where kind of new versions of this deck pop up and occasionally do well even without Mox Opal. And this one has Urza and like some talismans, and you see some like very strange card choices because you kind of have to at this point. The deck sort of got gutted, but it does seem pretty strong against like the more mid-range slower stuff that people are doing in Modern.
It absolutely does not work here, and it probably doesn't work in a bunch of scenarios where you want to play Urza. But I am curious if there's going to be a deck that looks to sort of double down on Urza's using Galazeth Prismari. Unlocking that kind of mana in Modern could be a big deal, and we're seeing some of the power of just unlocking your treasures being put forth in Historic right now. There's like the Torrential Gear Hulk, Magma Opus decks that are all over the place, and I wonder if there's some way to get Urza in the mix with all of that going on. I don't really even have a sketch yet. I don't have anything to offer, but redundancy in that effect should be powerful. I feel like you can exploit that in some way.
Maybe. I normally feel like 4 Urza is probably enough for decks like that. I mean, especially since like Urza just lets you do whatever you want with the mana, right? So you would have to be...
It is a very silly Magic card. Very silly.
Yeah, you would have to specifically be doing instants and sorcery stuff for Galazeth to matter, which may or may not work out. Maybe you can find a shell for that. I don't know.
Time will tell.
Anyway, Lantern still present, technically viable. Mordekaiser, 80 card, Yorion Enigmatic Incarnation. Do I need to read this?
I need you to read all 80 cards, please.
No, I'm not doing that, especially since it's a lot of one-ofs. Just the enchantment specifically.
Are you not familiar with it? Do you think our listeners are not familiar with it? Or?
Oh, I'm very familiar. Me
too. I love this card. Go ahead and read it.
I almost wrote an article about this card. I did a lot of work on this in Standard when it came out, and was just like, nah, this is probably nonsense. People aren't going to like this. And then it started showing up, and I was like, I knew it.
I like this card a lot.
2 GU enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another enchantment. If you do, search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed enchantment's converted mana cost. I'm sorry, mana value.
Oh, you did so well the first time. I was so impressed. And then you blew it on the second pass.
Put that card on the battlefield and shuffle your library. So it's like you want this scale of enchantments and creatures, and it's this very weird birthing pod effect. And I was close to finding some homes for it in Standard, and obviously like bigger card pool in Modern, it's a lot easier to just be like, I'll get Magus of the Moon or whatever. Right. And it's like, yeah, hey, that's pretty good. You did it. In Standard, it was a little more rough. It was like, all right, what do I have at 3 mana that is just not an embarrassing card, right? And it's like, oh, I guess I play Llanowar Visionary or something. But this has been showing up a lot in Pioneer too, for whatever that's worth. I consider that kind of a fake format at this point, but powerful card.
I agree with you. I played this a bunch in Standard alongside Yorion as backup. So I probably had more of a Yorion deck than I had an Enigmatic Incarnation deck, but doing a lot of Archon of Sun's Grace stuff and very easily finding wins once my Enigmatic Incarnation was online, and just really enjoying the games too, because you do get some of that birthing pod creativity you get to show off, but it's not quite as busted as that. Like usually you just won the game if you activated your birthing pod. In old Modern, this is a lot more fair, a lot more requiring you to jump through some hoops. Although when you're adding things like Magus of the Moon to the mix, I guess it becomes less fair, right? You're basically trying to just get your opponent out of the game as soon as possible. And I think this deck will do that job in some scenarios. You just kind of need your opponent to cooperate with you. Like that's what's going on here. If they want to try and play a fair game plan with you, you can overcome anything they're up to. You have all the tools. But the more degenerate stuff is always going to give decks like this fits.
So we've talked, like definitely in person or online or whatever with each other about adding mana cost to things in order to, put a gate on them so that they don't potentially break.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if we ever mentioned something like that on the cast or not, but like this is another way to do that, right? Where it's like specifically once per turn, you are able to do this. And then that leads to something like this being actually kind of fun versus Birthing Pod, where you're like, all right, how do I abuse this?
How do I cheat this? Yeah. How do I get multiple activations? And there's always going to be an answer to that. There's always going to be a way to cheat it. Here, the answers are much more ridiculous. And I like this moving things to doing things in your end step, right? You're very clearly dictating when this is going to happen. There is immediate value that comes from it, which is, in some ways more impressive than a card like Birthing Pod, where if this is in play, you don't need more mana. It's just ready to go. And that is cool. Obviously, it costs more, so you're paying for it elsewhere. But I do like how this is just very clean, and it feels like more what was intended when they designed Birthing Pod, right? This is what they were hoping you would do.
Yeah, and this also gives your opponent a window to actually interact with it too, which, if you're playing the card, maybe it's less feel good for you, but it's like feel good for your opponent. But yeah, this deck is cool because you have to build around so many different things, right? It's like you need the enchantment package, you need the creature package. This deck also has 3 copies of Ephemerate, so against some players, you're going to find something like Skyclave Apparition and then blink it a bunch. So you have a bunch of different sideways plans, and I don't know, it's like the Kiki Chord decks, but just like dialed up as far as all the different toolboxy things that you can do. And any like turn 4 or turn 5 that you play could go in so many different directions. It seems like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment.
Never going to touch it, likely in Modern, but
Modern would be a hard sell, but I hope I get to do it again in Standard before its time is done.
Oh, here we go. Next deck, Ictomo 0912.
I can't believe you did this to me. You got me so hyped for this card, and this is where it's going to show up.
Okay, so Autocathon Worm, Nourishing Shoal, Fortifying Drought.
Yep.
This is Neoform, Griselbrand, but they banned Spirit Guide, right? So you needed like a weirder way to actually make mana on the turn that you're going off. So now we have Mox Amber and Springleaf Drum, which takes up a lot of deck slots, but that's just what they're doing now. So no more being able to play things like Serum Visions necessarily. And 2 copies of Fortifying Drought, I guess, if you just want to drop an Allosaurus Rider and Shoal kill them, like that works too.
It does work. You gain some life, and then you throw it at them with Rite of Consumption, and GG. You found your win. And I don't know how consistently this deck does its thing, but I'm sure
this looks very Glass Cannon-y now.
I mean, to say that in comparison to the old version of the Neoform deck is saying a lot, because that deck was already way too far along Glass Cannon side of the spectrum. And I agree this is going even further than that. So you're not talking me into this one either, but I guess I'm still happy to see Fortifying Drought making a guest appearance here in the Modern leagues.
Well, the thing is once it shows up once, then people are like, oh, this is a thing that you can do, and they'll start exploring it in other shells.
Right. And this doesn't have that much to do with the actual Neoform combo, right? Like you can slot this to other places if you really want to. I don't know how you do so efficiently, but I think now you have to at least consider it.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's like a 4-card combo, right? It's like Creature, Shoal, Worm, Drought, and getting through unblocked is lethal. And I'm sure that there is a package you can figure out that is, reasonable to build around.
Yeah, I think the hard thing is going to be replacing Shoal, probably. Like that's the piece you always need to draw. I am pretty sure. But all the other stuff does have levels of redundancy besides draw it too. So those 2 pieces are kind of non-negotiable, but I think the other stuff you can find multiple copies of.
I'm sure there is something that benefits from you gaining 15 life in a turn that you could build redundancy into, but who knows?
I would have to think about that, and I don't want to, so done with it.
Captain Schwiggles, Orzhov, another Griselbrand deck. This is Goryo's Vengeance on Obsidat. If you accomplish that, you get to keep the Ghost Dad, which is cool. So that's somewhat redundant with Griselbrand. This deck is kind of weird though, because if you Goryo's Griselbrand, there's no Spirit Guide, There's no like soul spike or anything in this deck, so you're capped on what you can accomplish that turn. It's basically just like
Faragristle brand, the rarely seen Faragristle brand.
Yeah, maybe I hit you for 7 and draw 7 cards, and that's about it. Like you're breaking even on life, right? Because you have to pay the life that you gain. So best case scenario, maybe you have some extra mana open, you get to like lightning axe some stuff or whatever, bolt them a couple times, and you have a hand ready to go for next turn. But I mean, this deck has Enigmatic Channeler, Seasoned Pyromancer, Kroxa. It's also just like a kind of fair mid-range deck, which is
right.
Sort of
That's the return you're getting here, is you get to play like some fairly real cards, like your Thoughtseizing, Inquisition, Collective Brutality. All that stuff is good interactive Magic. At some point, getting Obsidian online, that all tracks. That all seems fine. I think you're doing the quote unquote busted stuff so rarely that I don't love this particular setup. But maybe if you could find a way to just combine those two plans a little bit better, get a little bit more into the busted side of things, then you could sell me on the idea that this is a real setup that can work in Modern. Because I do think you need those explosive games where you're up against something like Tron, right? Where you know it's just going to always do its thing on turn 3, and that's how it is. And you need to be able to do something explosive to compete with that. I want access to that. I want some way of accomplishing these things. And this deck simply doesn't have it.
How's Kai doing? Is Kai
he is
okay?
Apparently very upset with something. I'm going to assume there's a dog walking through the neighborhood or something like that, and he has taken a very staunch objection to that dog intruding on his territory.
How dare they?
Right. They should know better.
Next deck is from Sputnicked X91 or something. Esper Control. This is the all charms deck, effectively. Esper Charm, Archmage's Charm, Kaya's Guile. I get it. I understand why this is a thing. People love Grixis and things like that. This is Esper. People love charms, so I guess like that's the reason why you play Esper over Grixis in this scenario. It's like, look at all these modes. These cards have mostly been outmoded by Planeswalkers, but I don't know. I think the main games I see decks like this win are when people don't play around the charms effectively.
So really good at leveraging skill differentials, you would say?
I guess. I mean, Kaya's Guile now shows up in enough of these decks where I feel like people should be getting used to it, but I still see the blowouts.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't have much to add about this deck. I think it's been around long enough that you know what it does, you know what it's capable of. People who love this, they're not listening to what I have to say about it, so why bother? Encowden,
is it Deceiver XR, Kiki Jiki, with a bunch of Blood Moons, a couple Crackling Drakes at the top end? It's basically like Pestermite with Kiki Jiki. I mean, that's game over, right?
Sure. Yeah, we'll count it. We'll allow that to happen. Where are my new cards? I want new exciting cards. We're here for the Strixhavens, and I'm talking about Kiki Jiki. Are you kidding me?
1 Prismari command in the sideboard.
Okay, you caught me.
What's up?
Thanks.
Okay. This next one doesn't necessarily have new cards, but I can kind of loop it into new cards. You ready for this?
Great, I'm ready.
Arhawk, Gruul Valakut with indomitable creativity, just going off of Dwarven Minds and putting a bunch of Primeval Titans into play.
Love me a Dwarven Mind. I think that's great. And I kind of believe in indomitable creativity. We're seeing a lot of it start to pop up in Historic.
Boom, look
in
at
conjunction
that. Look at that.
With Magma Opus. And I believe in it there. I think it's doing some really powerful stuff really consistently. And those cards play really well. And maybe you could even talk me into doing some combination of those things here, because like ramping to your Primeval Titan, it's kind of just like playing another Farseek, right? Like it's just an additional land that you're using. I mean, I guess you miss out on the Valakut triggers or whatever, but accelerating to your Primeval Titan is still a big deal. And being able to more consistently trigger your indomitable creativity doesn't sound bad to me either. So I wonder if we can do a little splicey here and get these to work together.
I feel like this setup is mostly good enough. I mean, maybe you can make a case for Dwarven Mind not being enough, but this deck has Explore, Farseek, Into the North, Search for Tomorrow. Like, you're almost certainly going to be able to Dwarven Mind on 4 mana and then just immediately pop it. So,
yeah, we of course get to search it up as well with our fetch lands. So very consistent access to Dwarven Mine. That is true.
Yeah, if you can't Mystic Sanctuary, you're Dwarven mining in Modern. That's what you got to be doing, right?
This is what they forced me to do. Look at what I've become.
Yeah, I mean, this is not bad. And I don't really, I mean, maybe you could play like a couple Magma Opus to add consistency to it or whatever, but I think that this setup is good enough. And this is also not a new setup, right? Like this has been around for a while.
Yep.
But I was more skeptical of it up until recently, where things like Transmogrify and Luca and now Creativity are seeing a lot of play. And just like, to me, it seemed like it should be easier to interact with the polymorph. But just the way that decks are being built now as a result of what the formats look like, there's not a ton of spot removal in these decks.
Yeah, I think we've all learned our lesson about these effects. And one of the things we said when Luca was having its moment in Standard was just like, were we supposed to be playing Polymorph this whole time? Like, were we just dumb and didn't realize it? Because that happens in Magic. You'll go years with a class of card where you just dramatically underappreciate it. And I think the answer to that is mostly yes. We were supposed to be doing more of this. I'm not saying we should be doing it all the time, but there are decks where it makes a lot of sense for this to be your plan. And you could convince me that this is one of them.
Yeah, it suddenly, after seeing the Izzet decks in Historic, now I look at this deck and I'm just like, maybe this is the setup. Maybe this is what you were supposed to be doing all along.
Could be. I wish we got a little bit more out of our mana base. I'll say that. Like, it's obviously not what it was when, like, you could feel the dead and play all these diverse game plans just based on what you had in your mana base. And that makes me a little sad. But I get why it's set up this way. I'm not trying to say I would change it. It just... I'm longing for the days when my mana base could basically do everything for me.
Yeah, I understand. That makes sense. But, this is just consistent.
Yep, absolutely.
Darth Panda 47, mono blue Tron.
I still have nothing to say here. This is a deck that's going to be in every deck dump till the end of time. And maybe at some point I'll have some input on it. It
technically exists.
It really does. It really does.
Oh, here we go. Unagil. Go, Brian. Go, Brian.
It's go time, baby. Clever Lumimancer. Sorry.
Almost
Leonin Lightscribe. Like and subscribe, as well as everyone's favorite Nivmagus Elemental back in Modern, baby. We all knew it was coming. It was just a matter. It was a matter of time. Nivmagus Elemental sitting on the sidelines, just happy to be dismissed, happy to be slipped into my suitcases by people who think they're being funny, mocking me about Nivmagus Elemental. That's fine. That can all happen. But who's laughing now? Who's holding all the Nivmagus Elementals? It's me. I've got them all.
Unfortunately, Austin's not in here, but
he thinks he's a real riot. For folks who don't know, we shared a...
It was funny
house.
To me.
We shared a house for the last GP/PT in Virginia, in Richmond, Virginia, with a bunch of folks from our Discord who we've become friends with over time. And one of our lovely guests here in the Discord, Austin, thought it was so funny to just anything I'd left in my room, I found a Nivmagus Elemental in it. I'm reading a book. Oh, there's a Nivmagus Elemental. I'm going through security, emptying my pockets. Oh, there's Nivmagus Elementals everywhere.
He replaces like your ID with a Nivmagus or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Makes it so you can't board your plane home.
It was a real disaster. But like I said, really, Austin thought he was trolling me. What actually happened is I just have even more Nivmagus Elementals in my collection now. I just took them out and put them in a box. I'm like, sweet, more free Nivmagus Elemental, basically. And who's laughing now? This guy.
It is gas to me. It's like, there are pranks that happen spur of the moment, and that's kind of whatever. But like, he showed up to the house with like
the level of planning it took to just have that many Nivmagus Elementals on hand was, especially after I had cornered the market. Like those things aren't easy to find at this point. I own them all, so it's really impressive for him to come up with some.
Anyway, this deck is solid. It's okay.
Yeah, it's good. It's still doing these Nivmagus-y elemental type things. Really explosive turns. Lumimancer is exactly the redundancy this deck was lacking. I don't know that I buy Lightscribe yet. Like I get it. You need something. You can't just have the 8/1 drops. I'm not sure how many games Lightscribe is really winning though. I am concerned about that.
So judging from this deck list and a bunch of other ones that I've seen, I think that there's another one in here that's, a bunch of prowess creatures, right? Mm-hmm. And Lumimancer. if you are going to commit to Nivmagus so that you have Flusterstorm and Ground Rift, maybe not all 8 copies, but 6 to 8, somewhere in there, I don't think that you then want Swift Spear.
Okay. You need to get paid on the copy, basically.
Yeah, because Swift Spear with Ground Rift doesn't really accomplish a whole lot. And now, so like Light Scribe plus Ground Rift is like, okay, cool, that's gonna be, I don't know, like 8 damage or something. And this deck only has 2 Assault Strobes, no Battle Rages or anything like that. It's like, I guess you're getting paid, but probably not in the amount that actually kills your opponent. So I'm still not sure if it's actually worth it.
Yeah, I don't have a replacement plan, but I would like to believe there's something a little bit more efficient we could do. Like I'm not trying to go back to our Flame King Harbingers or anything like that. That was not the solution, but
nope.
I do wish we could find something else to play in this slot. Maybe that will be the moment where this deck is just soundly the best thing you can possibly do. When we get our 3rd creature to add to the mix, man. That's really all we're missing at this point.
Look at how much better this deck list looks than the one that we played in the Pro Tour, though. It's
it's night and day.
We had to play Slaughter Pact and Pact of Negation, which basically didn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
We had Assault Strobe and Tainted Strike. We had 6 of those. We only had 4 Ground Rifts, which was like the Power Spike card. And this sideboard gets to play Bedlam Reveler, which was like the exact sort of effect that we wanted for things like Jund. It's like, this deck is so much better than it was.
Yeah, things have gotten better. And
for whatever that says, I don't know.
Yep. Love to see it. Lurrus in the sideboard too. Can you imagine having like that? Just seems like a fever dream that you would be able to Lurrus.
Yeah. That's also kind of a joke, I suppose.
Yeah, big upgrades.
Hiorako, Winota, Angrass Marauders, and some humans and some non-humans.
That is generally how we do these things. That's how we put together Winota decks. This is certainly one of those. This looks like a Pioneer deck, where I think it's very solidly tier 2 in that format. So probably about the same here.
Yeah, this deck list is funny to me too, because it's Eldritch Evolution, which makes sense. Your Eldritch Evolution, your Strangleroot Geist, or Seasoned Pyromancer, or whatever.
Yeah.
And the only real bullet is Magus of the Moon, and then the sideboard is just all bullets.
We'll fix that in post-board games. That's when we'll get our bullets sorted out. I kind of get it, sort of.
It's weird, but yeah. Next deck is from Neto, and 3TO. Blue-Red Storm, 2 copies of Expressive Iteration. There you go, Brian.
New card. Jerry, this was your number 1 card in Standard for Strixhaven. Let's check in on that assessment, first of all. Are you still big on this in Standard? Because it might sound like I'm trolling you. I've really liked this card in Standard. I know it's not getting a ton of play, but my experience with it has been very positive. And then I want to know what you think of this card in Modern.
Modern in Prowess, I like a lot.
Okay.
In a deck like this, I'm less high on it, but this deck like really did want a draw to. So if this is the card that you play on turn 3 to like make your land drop and impulse for the ritual that you need or whatever, I think that's pretty good. Obviously, you don't want to flood on them, so like 2 copies kind of makes sense. In Standard, I think that again, like we talked about earlier, there weren't a lot of people exploring Standard because there wasn't a whole lot of reason to. So there hasn't been a whole lot of advancement made. I think that there's a lot of exploration to be done in Standard still. And at that point, I think this card will show up more. I would assume that there's a card that I like more in Standard than this. Vanishing Verse, for example, has shown up a lot in decks that I think are kind of bad, but it's still shown up a lot. Whereas I think that this is a card that is probably pretty good in decks that are good, Teamer, Is It, stuff like that. So I don't know. I think it's still good. Maybe it's not like slam dunk the number 1 best card or whatever, but it's also hard for me to pinpoint exactly what that card is.
Yeah, I've played this a bunch in basically my Is It Dragon setups. And I think it's one of the reasons why you can start to think about leaving green behind. And it does good things in that role. Like I said, I'm not 100% sold on that idea yet, but this is one of the reasons I believe you can start to get away from green. It's just done what I've needed it to. And it's scales very, very well into the late game. Getting 3 cards deep for basically whatever you need is awesome, especially when you have like a bunch of 7 mana win the games in your deck, especially when you're playing Galazeth Prismari and you have access to mana to cast this a little bit more freely. So it's impressed me in that scenario. Even if it hasn't set Standard on fire yet, I do think this is going to see more play as time goes on.
Yeah, you have Galazeth. You have some artifacts that maybe can't cast Goldspan Dragon, but you can cast this effectively for free. Find the Goldspan Dragon, cast it off the lands that you have, stuff like that. So I think it is good in those setups. Scipios, Dredge, 4 copies of Thrilling Discovery. This is scary. This isn't like Faithless Looting scary, but these cards are powerful.
Deck didn't need much to be. I mean, it was already like occasionally tier 1. It very metagame dependent is how I would classify Dredge. It comes in and out of favor, but certainly on par with the most powerful things you can be doing in Modern. And then you add this level of consistency, card draw, and even the life gain matters. Like you play games on very thin margins against the more aggressive decks in this format, and picking up 2 life can really be a difference maker in those scenarios. So I think Thrilling Discovery did a lot to move this archetype soundly into tier 1. Now Dredge has a hard time occupying that status for any prolonged period of time because it is always going to be vulnerable to hate. That's just how things go with Dredge. But in the moment, I think you can't do much better than choosing to play Dredge until people respect it properly. And I think I'm starting to come around to the idea of like, we should never let Dredge be a thing in Modern. I don't think it's like net positive for it ever to be good enough. I am fairly confident that banning Creeping Chill would just be net positive. And because that's the card that really takes it to like stupid levels where you just don't feel like you're participating in the game, and it becomes a complete crapshoot. Like, oh, how many Creeping Chills did you hit? And that's going to determine whether or not I can actually have a chance in this game. And it's not a great feeling. So I would sort of look to make a quality of life buff to Modern rather than this is broken type move for an adjustment. And I think those things should be like on the table more often in Modern, especially when they're not completely invalidating a deck. I think if you take out Creeping Chill from this deck, there's still moments where this could be the correct thing to be doing. And you're not just punishing someone to losing their pet deck and they never get to play it again. I think there's still a chance to. This should never be the best thing to be doing. And I think Thrilling Discovery pushes it a lot towards being the best thing to be doing.
The problem I have with that is that there's just always going to be something else.
But it doesn't have to be that egregious. I know you're right. I know there's no reason why like something else won't step in to take Dredge's place, but it doesn't have to feel quite as bad, I think. And that's how you make Modern a popular format. And nightmare matchups over the long term, they do have an effect on people's participation. And obviously this is all completely nonsensical because we can't participate in Modern. We can't go play FNM and see what Modern attendance looks like. So maybe there's just a time down the road that we can have this discussion, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But I don't love that card being present in the format.
I just mean in the case of Dredge, like
they'll find another card to use to kill you, basically.
Yeah, there will be something printed in the future, you know? So I agree with the premise where it's like, you know, Dredge is kind of silly. There should be a graveyard deck in Modern, absolutely, but, you know, maybe not to this degree. Thrilling Discovery does help them a lot. I do think it's kind of funny where if this gets countered, forced negation, whatever, you're not getting the discard like you would with Cathartic Reunion. So it's
which is better? Do you have like a snap take over which is actually a better card in this deck?
I mean, it's Reunion for sure. Like you want to get, if you're playing against someone who's countering your stuff, you would rather just deposit your Dredger in the graveyard and like get that going next turn. You know, you don't really care like that. Like your discard outlet getting countered is the thing that's most annoying to you. Not like, oh, I had to discard 2 cards. Like that's a benefit.
Do you think there's an argument that the difference of Thrilling Discovery and other scenarios is enough where it makes it the better? Like, does the 2 life ever matter enough to make you consider it a more important card for Dredge? This is kind of a silly conversation. It doesn't really matter what the answer to this is, but I find it interesting. So I'm gonna make you suffer through it.
Depends on the metagame. I mean, I initially didn't think the Creeping Chill would matter very much in Modern Dredge. I thought it would be good in Legacy Dredge because that deck played more of like a Putrid Imp, Icarid kind of beatdown game against opponents who are like slightly disrupting you. So it's like, yeah, I could see where Chill would be relevant. Like this helps you race Delver and get in like the last few points after your board gets Terminus or whatever. So I liked it there. And then for this one, it was like, well, you mostly just completely overwhelm people, right? And that is true except against aggro decks that race you or like burn, stuff like that. So Creeping Chill made those kind of like half beatdown games more palatable, and against burn, it definitely gave you like that extra turn or 2 that you needed. And then this helps too. Like it just further solidifies its matchups in certain spots. Like, obviously, there are matchups where like 2 life, who cares, completely irrelevant. But if you're racing someone, then it does matter a lot.
Yeah, I hope this deck isn't out of control the next time we check in on Modern. I hope it hasn't become the focal point of the format.
Yeah, me too. Next up, John, Jeskai Control. Of all the things that you could be doing in Modern, this is like kind of a boring one. I understand why people like this. This one has 4 Cleansing Wildfire, 4 Flagstones. Also,
love it.
A Rip Apart in the sideboard. Like, cool. You're doing some different stuff, but oh no. I was gonna say like there are other cooler things you could be doing, and then I saw the Castle Vantress and the Mana Base. Now I'm just even more off it.
I'm not going to make you talk about a Castle Vantress deck. We can just move on. No
gain or loss. Trying to take this all in. I saw like some familiar cards and then some weird cards. Azorius, Stoneforge Mystic, love it. I want to play this deck again because there are things like Skyclave Apparition that have added a lot to it. Shark Typhoon 2. Mm-hmm. I was working on lists when Shark Typhoon came out, so like that was in some of my lists, but haven't actually went back and tried to reconfigure them after Skyclave Apparition. So there's a lot of work here to be done, a lot of cool things that you could be doing. This list doesn't have Skyclave Apparition. It does have like Blast Zone and Castle Ardenvale, where I was like, what's going on? But yeah, I mean, this deck is solid. It's a little bit underpowered, but it's like the sweet spot for it where I want to be.
I was really hoping you'd get into this deck list and start to like think positive about it. And then I got to the castle part of the land list and I was like, oh, Castle Vantress. No, it was a Castle Ardenvale instead.
Respectable in a deck with a bunch of equipment in Stoneforge Mystic.
Yeah, it makes a little bit of sense.
One thing I would not play it, but whatever.
One thing I'll point out is that white sideboard cards tend to come into play en masse. It's weird that some of the ones I would expect to see here, like one of the reasons I often want to do things like this is for access to Rest in Peace. And I understand like you're a Snapcaster deck, but it's pretty easy to get away from that most of the time in post-board games where Rest in Peace is good. And if Dredge is really good, I like having access to that card again, of course. We already mentioned Deicide, so that is present. Your favorite Timely Reinforcements here. So there's a lot of good stuff happening in terms of what you have access to in post-board games. I do think there needs to be some smoothing out here of the wrinkles, but I don't hate this archetype. It's just hard for it to be the best thing to be doing.
There's generally been a mix of like Rest in Peace and Ashiok. Like when there are Primeval Titan decks, you usually need Ashiok and then that covers some of your bases. So normally it's like a 2-1 split. That's kind of, or like 2-2 if there's a lot of graveyard stuff. So that's probably why Rest in Peace is not here. Ashiok is just kind of taking that place, even though obviously it's way worse against Dredge.
Right. Yeah, I think at this point, the metagame has diversified enough where you got to cover both those angles. So,
yep. Beijiao, Sigarda's Aid, Colossus Hammer, now with Magnetic Theft. It's fine.
Yeah, fine.
It exists.
No notes.
Kind of fallen out of favor against all the Heliod decks, I think.
A little bit more inconsistent, I would say, and no real B plan. It's kind of just you do this thing. It's got to be good enough, and it certainly is good enough when it comes together. It just doesn't come together with quite the consistency you would like for this deck to have gotten into tier 1 territory.
Yeah, you bonk them or you don't. Lilia, go Bryan.
Fantastic deck choice. Back to 32 land Amulet Titan. You love to see it. There's nothing flashy here, but look.
And a Turn Timber Symbiosis. It's like 33.
33 lands. Thank you. You don't have to be flashy when it comes to Amulet Titan. You do this one thing, you do it really well. Of course, using Dryad of the Elysian Grove these days alongside Valakut. We miss you. Field the Dead, RIP. Crumbling Vestige as one of the lands here. I don't really object to that. That's fine with me. Love the Castle Garen Briggs. All typical Amulet Titan stuff, and I am so thankful that this seems to have come back around to at least be reasonable again, because I own this stupid deck in foil, and if that's going to be the case, I really want to get my money's worth out of it, and it's a lot of money at this point, so I need to be able to play this for the rest of my life, basically, to get my money's worth.
I even played your deck once.
You did? Yeah. Well, it wasn't quite it wasn't Amulet Titan. It was.
I played a lot of your cards once.
Yeah, a lot of those shinies. Well, one of the cards I have never gotten to use is Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and at least not in these large numbers, because I know I only got my 4 beautiful foil full art copies after the pandemic had started. So they are untouched, just absolutely pristine, waiting to get their go in Amulet Titan.
Z Best Max. Thassa's Oracle, Spoils of the Vault, ad nauseum, I guess. How are they winning?
Well, I guess it's just Thassa's Oracle at this point. And
yeah, but like how do you have 7 mana?
You got to have mana on the turn.
That seems way Prism, worse.
Pentad Prism built up.
Shelldock Isle.
Shelldock Isle. Okay. Shelldock Isle works. You can do that.
I like that as the backup plan. That is really good. We talked about that before.
Yeah. Like I said, so much of this deck was based on its ability to play timing games. It's harder to do that in these scenarios now that we've lost Simian Spirit Guide. It's not impossible. You can still do this at instant speed, but a lot more, I think, has to go right. And you don't have the same kind of protection you had previously when you were relying on things like, possibly Boseiju out of the sideboard was a very important card in moments where the metagame got very hostile. And I don't think that's the metagame we're in right now. So if a bunch of people are trying to dredge, this is sort of appealing to me. Like I like that we can go in this direction instead and get some easy combo kills.
It seems so slow to me.
3 ad nauseam.
Yeah, I mean, you're mostly trying to set up like Oracle, Spoils, Angel's Grace, right?
I don't know. It's been so long since I've dabbled in a little bit of ad nauseum that I maybe shouldn't comment on it at this point, but it just seems like you need to maximize how many chances you have of doing your thing. And whether your thing is Angel's Grace ad nauseum or anything else, like you want to be able to play those games that go long where you do have access to that tremendous boost of mana. I think it's fine to plan for those games as well. I guess you just don't have as many clean kills with it, so you have to back away from it a little bit. And that makes me say it's probably time to not be playing this deck anymore.
I like the versions that are just trying to do the Oracle thing. I think that that's cool and that makes sense. But like ad nauseum and needing a bunch of mana is a little awkward.
So you just want to skip the ad nauseum package entirely. You're done with that.
It seems better to me.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that's the path forward for this deck.
Next up, best deck in the history. Frank Bonaparte.
Wow.
Gruul Ensnaring Bridge. Arbor Elf, Utopia Sprawl. Pillage, Blood Moon. Karn the Great Creator. A couple Chandra, Torch of Defiance, and a couple Chandra, Heart of Fire.
Let me tell you something. I just love the idea that Frank Bonaparte, gets home from work or whatever they accomplish on a particular day, and they just want to unwind, and they go, how I'm going to get my kicks in tonight.
Blood Moon, Ensnaring Bridge.
Blood Moon, Ensnaring Bridge on turn 2. That's all I want. I just want someone to feel the same pain I felt going through my day today. Now, at the end, at the conclusion, I want them to have that experience.
Is that like Agretzko?
Kind of, yeah. I could see that. So if you don't know Agretzko, it's an anime about an office worker who's just in like a horrible office job, and she goes at the end of her work days and sings like death metal karaoke in karaoke bars as her way to unwind. And I think there are some similarities to Agretzko and Frank Bonaparte's approach to the post workday unwind session.
Yeah, I didn't watch the entirety. I liked the premise, but like the show itself was, kind of medium. But
I think it's not the correct show for you. You generally are off that kind of goofy vibe. But we shouldn't get too deep on anime because I think this anime season is really good and I have lots of opinions on it. And I could easily just hijack the rest of the show talking about it. So don't tempt me.
All right. Jordi Tatur Bogles.
I definitely don't have anything to say about this. So
I got.
We can just keep going.
Matt Flacco, Goblins, 2 Pyre of Heroes.
I really like Pyre of Heroes. I hope it has a moment. I'm not sure that this has added anything new to this archetype. I think you're just kind of waiting to see if you get why am I forgetting the name of the stupid big thing? Oh my, Muxus. You're waiting to see if someday Muxus comes to your format, and then you can finally be the Goblins deck you've always wanted to be. But thankfully, we're not there yet, and I'm not sure we ever will be. And Pyre of Heroes probably not carrying us to greatness.
Ball Tap. Nice screen name.
Love it.
Yorion, Fires of Invention.
Okay.
Transmogrify, Velomachus, bunch of Planeswalkers, Savor the Moment, Time Warp.
Savor the Moment. We're up to some stuff here.
Indomitable Creativity. This is like 7 different decks coming together, and it looks good because Fire's Planeswalkers was already passable. And
sure,
Fires was Savor the Moment and Planeswalkers, very good. Velomachus, we talked about when it came out. It's like it hits Time Warp. If you do things to bump its power, it could hit Alrund's Epiphany, but now you have Savor the Moment. Velomachus itself has Vigilance. Mm-hmm. This is all working out, man.
This looks good. I mean, I'm trying to think of holes that I could possibly punch through this, but there's powerful cards. I mean, I guess you're like kind of slow for the modern format.
Yeah.
Like you don't really do anything before turn 3 at the earliest. But am I really going to call a deck slow that could potentially win on turn 3? Like Growth Spiral into some kind of transmogrifying does it for you. Can you get a token in play by that time?
Yeah, well,
just Dwarven Mine, right?
Yeah, you play Dwarven Mine as your 4th land and transmogrify that.
Yeah, so there you go. You just won on turn 3 after your lore hold hits your Time Warps and Savor the Moments, and that strikes me as plenty good for the modern format. I don't know how consistently you're doing that, but we're up to basically six transmogrify effects with the addition of Indomitable Creativity and 8 Time Warps. So you're going very deep with your Velomachus lore holds. You get 7 chances to find one of those 8 Time Warps, Time Walks. And you should get there a pretty good percentage of the time. And you even get like rerolls in the next few turns as you go into Valakut Awakening, where you just get to put your hand back and look for your Time Warp that you can then pay retail on.
Right.
So I think if this deck attacks with Velomachus Lorehold, it's winning a very large percentage of the time. And it seems to me that it's pretty good at getting there.
So all the lands make red. I was wondering what the difference is between Creativity and Transmogrify, because you can't Creativity where X is 2 because the only thing is Velomachus, right? So I guess it's just split for Meddling Mage reasons.
Sure, that tracks. If they are functionally the same, then I think that's 100% correct.
Yeah. Valakut Awakening is kind of awkward because it's not a mountain for Dwarven Mine. You can't Growth Spiral off of it, but it seems reasonable considering what the deck is trying to do, and you want a way to shuffle in Velomachus if you draw both copies or whatever. So yeah, this all tracks. This might be a good Pioneer deck too.
Does this need to be 80 cards is the question I have. Like, is that really the road we need to go down? Because when you're trying to hit, some very specific cards off your Velomachus. Now, granted, it's very good for reducing your odds of drawing the Velomachus. I think that's kind of important.
Yep.
But what's your opinion? Just real quick, I'm obviously putting you on the spot, having not played with this deck, but 80 cards, do you think that maybe there's a better 60 card version out there?
There are 16 fetch lands and 4 Dwarven Mines, so I think you're kind of covered on that base.
Okay.
You could play up to 8 Transmogrifies if you wanted to feel like you're functionally 60 cards, right? And so the upside is that you have Fires into Yorion, which is powerful with Planeswalkers and stuff, versus having quote unquote consistency. But I think that the consistency is there already. It's like you have as much of it as you want.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly saw it with Jeskai Luka, right? I would not describe that as an inconsistent deck, despite the fact that it was playing 80 cards. It did its thing very reliably, and you can find setups that allow you to do so. Lots of good pieces here. Jace, Tameo, protection with Teferi, early disruption in the form of Wrenn and 6, making all your land drops. It looks really promising to me. Okay,
I guess the thing that you can make an argument for, it's like, is there something that you need to draw specifically that you would want to be 60 cards? It's like over half the lands are Dwarven Mines, so that's covered, right? Mm-hmm. And you can play more Transmogrifies if you wanted to, so I think that's covered too. The thing that I would maybe argue for is like you draw Growth Spiral more often, but you could also play more of that in Explore if you wanted to.
Yeah.
But
I think Teferi might be a really important card in several matchups where you always want to draw it.
That card's obviously very good, but so you have 4 savers and 4 time warps, which is a lot. And if you wanted to increase the consistency of which you actually hit one off of Velomachus and continue to combo off, then I guess that's your reason for 60. And I'm curious how many time walks you would actually play if you were playing 60 cards.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Saver kind of works as the world's worst growth spiral. And that's not a bad place to be with that card, I think. So I think even if I was playing 60, you'd talk me into just playing the full 8.
Yeah. So then your odds of hitting go up by a lot. I'm not sure what the math is, how much it changes it, but that would be the argument, I think. And then, I don't know, stuff like Tamio, it's like, that's kind of whatever. Maybe you don't need Jace as much. The 4th Shark Typhoon, whatever. Like there's a lot of cards that you could certainly shave to get down to 60 and be reasonable. And then it's like, do you care about losing Yorion? I mean, it's really good with fires, so maybe. But you could play 60 if you wanted.
I am putting this on everyone's list as a very good homework assignment. If you're looking for a deck you can spend some time on in Modern and maybe come out of it with the next big thing, this seems like it's checking the right boxes.
Pioneer too. I mean, I guess like Teferi and Ren and 6 are gone, are not in there, but you have reasonable planeswalkers, and I believe Fires is still legal. Again, I consider Pioneer a fake format, so I'm not really paying attention, but
that is my last recollection of Pioneers, that you were still allowed to play Fires of Prevention. So I don't think that's changed.
Yeah. So, I mean, you could do this there too.
Worth a shot.
Sanitoter. 16 prowess creatures, 4 expressive iteration.
Yeah, you said you like this, and looking over this deck, it seems pretty consistent, pretty powerful. I don't know that you are going to immediately sell me on the idea that this is better than just being like as aggressive and burn-ish as possible, but I'm willing to at least consider it.
I don't think there's a big opportunity cost to playing some copies of this card.
I guess I'm less concerned with this card and more concerned with things like Opt and Vapor Snag, as opposed to things that can more consistently generate damage as some of the other options.
So are you talking about playing just mono red instead? Because I'm fine with that. I
think mono red or even like Boros Prowess is something you could consider. I'm not sure that going blue in particular, I mean, like the biggest draw to blue has to be expressive iteration. And that's like, am I actually running out of the cards I need to kill my opponent before I do so? And Stormwing Entity is there too, but I don't think Stormwing Entity in this deck is like particularly above the other options. Like it's a fine card, but it's not what's pushing me in this direction.
Yeah, they're not even playing a ton of zeros. There's Metamorphose and Growth to turn to it. So this deck isn't playing light up the stage either, and I think that you can make an argument for iteration versus stage, even though iteration is kind of better with the prowess stuff since you get to do it on main A versus main B. But I guess like when you have lava darts and occasionally gut shots in the mix, I mean, you can stage on main A anyway. So
sure. Yeah, fair enough.
It's close. I wonder if you could just do both and have that be reasonable, but it might be too much air.
Well, you know, I love a lot of air in my deck, so you could certainly get me there.
AFX, Boros Burn, Lurrus, I don't know, Bobble, 1 Seal of Fire, pretty normal.
Deck's still here, still probably real. Cedric will probably win another PTQ with it, so keep it going.
Brainstorm 39, Mono Blue Tron.
I thought we already did Mono Blue Tron. Didn't we already talk about this?
So it's not by archetype, it's by amount of card difference. And there is a large card difference between this deck and the other one. Dude, wait until we get to the other Blue Tron list.
No, there can't be a third Blue Tron list.
Oh, there's the third one.
I got to take a timeout. Hold on.
Curryvore, another 80 card deck. This is like the Azorius control decks. JB 2002 is a Japanese player who played that deck all the time, every format where it was legal. Didn't matter how good it was. It was like Wall of Omen, Kitchen Finks,
Sun Titan,
Restoration Angel, occasionally Sun Titan.
Okay.
But I remember bringing this up to Kenji, and he just laughed because I was like, he's Japanese, right? JB 2002, and he just died laughing, and that. Because it's like so obscure for me to know this and pay attention to it. And it's like that dude was doing it for like 15 years or something.
So you think this is his alt? Curryvore?
No. Curryvore I've seen enough, and I think playing different decks, but JB played one way, only one way.
Gotta respect it.
Yeah.
Gotta respect it.
And Kenji just thought it was so funny that I knew this like very obscure Japanese Magic player, you know. But that's what I think of when I see this list. Although I'm gonna go to Goldfish now and look up JB and see when the last time they cashed was, because I'm actually curious whether or not they would update their deck with Yorion.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay, 9/19/2020.
I feel like Ikoria was after that. Why do I not know?
Oh, there's a Yorion.
Yeah?
Yeah. 8th place in a modern challenge.
And that was it. That was the last time. They're like, you know what? I've actually had enough of this. I'm going to go ahead and pack this one up.
Well, so as far as we know, like they could have been playing this entire time and just never cashed anything. I don't know.
Oh, wow. Ikoria was in April. Well, why did I even try and understand time for 2020? What a joke that was.
Oh, apparently JB was playing like Astrolabe when that was legal. So
okay, expanding the range a little bit.
But dude, okay, seriously, I'm gonna put this link in the live chat.
All right, I'm clicking it.
Just like look at the list, right? And it's like 9 pages of results, and you go down. It's all white
long.
Blue.
It's real long. It goes back to like extended dailies, plain white blue and extended dailies. Hey, people have a type, you know?
Okay, so the last one is January 6th, 2011. 4 Wall of Omens, 4 Kitchen Finks, 4 Sun Titan.
I knew it. Yeah. I knew Sun Titan was going to be in the mix.
Yep. Well, this was before Resto. It had to have been, right?
Right.
But yeah. This is a JB 2K2 deck. That's all I have to say about it.
I clicked on a random one and got a Dragon Lord Ojutai, Gideon Jura. He's looking for random blue-white cards that are going to make you happy. You could just go through this list forever.
Yeah. Just an absolute legend. A decade straight of casting Wall of Omens.
Love it.
Can you imagine?
Kind of. Sometimes I feel like my whole life has just been casting Wall of Omens. Like not really getting anywhere, but maybe picking up a card or two.
Spinning those wheels.
Yeah.
Respect the Cat. Another 80 cards, just death and taxes, basically. Noble Hierarch.
Yeah, nothing to really report here. Fine disruptive elements, kind of similar to the historic green-white decks in some ways. I guess we have Apollos showing up, so that's worth noting for Elite Spellbinder making the cut here. So I know we're both very high on this card, so that doesn't surprise me at all.
Did I have to sway you? Was that you or was that someone else?
I think what you and I were talking about was Redain versus Paulo.
Okay.
And I was of the opinion that Redain could still be better in several scenarios. And I don't think you were, but I was never off the card. Like I thought it was quite good from the beginning.
Okay. Next deck, Otaba. This is another oldie but a goodie. 21 land, 4 Aether Vial, Tarmogoyf, Snapcaster Mage, Eternal Witness, Huntmaster of the Fells, Seasoned Pyromancer, Cryptic Command, Archmage's Charm. This is like not quite Grixis Lover type of stuff, but this sort of deck definitely attracts a type. This is like the Shota 2015, I think, Players Championship deck.
Why is this an Aether Vial deck?
Because Witness and Snapcaster, and then you get to vial those in and Cryptic Command things. That's
cool. I don't know that you need to Aether Vial though to like be able to do those things.
No, but you get to.
Okay, I can't argue with that. You know what? You win.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like you Aether Vial on 3. You like Witness your Witness. I don't know. So you take your crappy blue midrange shell, right? Like your JB 2002 deck,
right?
And
slap an Aether Vial in it.
And Aether Vial is just Black Lotus for your mediocrity. And that if everything comes together, then you have a real deck.
Well, who am I to judge that type of approach?
Anyway, it has Archmage's Charm and Seasoned Pyromancer, which are obviously very good cards and very good cards for this archetype, if you want to call this an archetype. But I don't know. It is weird to me that this deck is showing up again. It's like, whoa.
This deck also has the just absolute unfettered confidence of the type of player who says, I'm going to get to cast my spells no matter what. I don't care what the mana costs are on these spells. 3 Eternal Witness, 2 Seasoned Pyromancer, 4 Archmage Charm, 3 Cryptic Command.
Dude, 3 Flooded Grove. 3 Flooded Grove.
That's a lot of Flooded Groves. And also Ether Vial is there to go ahead and fix that creature mana. So who am I to argue?
Seasoned Pyromancer still seems pretty impossible to cast. There's also like 4 islands, 1 forest. You know,
it's fine.
Like,
Unfettered confidence. Just this is going to work out. Everything's going to be fine.
Yes. Just believe, man. That's it.
That's all you got to do.
Tito Wee 96, 80 cards. Pillage, Stone Rain. Also, Luca, Sahili, Felidar Guardian. Arbor Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarch. So if you Luca them, you will either get Felidar Guardian or Emrakul the Aeon's Torn. And if you have Felidar Guardian but can't kill your opponent, I guess you could Luca that into Emrakul. Otherwise, yeah, you're just doing Planeswalker value things, Blood Moon, Oath of Nissa, etc.
I'm not going to do this for the rest of the time we have a podcast. At some point, I promise I will stop doing this. But still, every now and then, it just strikes me. And it's a genuine moment of like, wow, that you used to just cast Yorion from a zone where it couldn't be interacted with, and it didn't cost more mana, and that was a real thing you could do. And then you look at something like this, and you're like, it just blows my mind that they let us do that without any restrictions whatsoever. And now that we have to pay 3 additional mana, an entire Black Lotus's worth of mana, we still go, yeah, that's fine for Modern. I'll happily play 80 cards to get access to this thing.
Well, what if you have Aether Vial on 5?
That's true. It becomes much easier. And that's almost 2 Black Lotuses worth of mana.
And this deck has Arbor Elf Utopia Sprawl, so.
Right. They're essentially all Black Lotuses. I understand why this deck is doing so well.
Or you could look at it like you're casting Pillage and Stone Raid and setting your opponent so far back that you're getting extra Black Lotuses worth.
We call that the reverse Black Lotus in the business.
Yeah.
Or
Blood Moon, so they can't cast anything, right? Then you have all the time in the world.
Super Lotus.
Anyway, man, yeah, this is, again, 3 decks shuffled together.
I like it. That's something I did for a long time. And sometimes you find something special by doing that.
I Squee. I'm surprised a deck like this is still good. This is mono red, basically prison. No Spirit Guide, but you have Gemstone Caverns. This deck is playing Desperate Ritual. A lot slower, I would think. I wonder if this deck chooses to be on the draw with Gemstone Caverns. But there's
that's interesting. Yeah, I could potentially see that.
Blood Moon, Rabble Master, 2 Magus of the Moon, some Ensnaring Bridge, Maze Mind Tome, Relic of Progenitus, Karn, Chandra, some Slag Storm. So, like, obviously a nod to they know that their deck has slowed down. Things like Maze Mind Tome, Slag Storm, like these games are going to be a lot slower. So this is more like, you know, a more traditional prison deck, I think, than like Moon Stompy or whatever Legacy folks are calling it these days.
So you always accuse me of intentionally punning at you and trying to pass it off. And I was my first reaction to Desperate Ritual was that desperate times call for desperate measures, but it really wasn't meant to do that. And then after I recognized that is in fact what I would be doing, I checked myself, slowed myself down, and didn't just drop it on you, because I want to be genuine with you and let you know that I was not trying to make that desperate pun. It was just there in my head for some reason. That's what the name of the card pushed me towards. And things are getting a little desperate for these decks, so they need to find ways to produce that 3 mana.
What if they had Poetic Ritual instead?
Poetic times call for poetic. I don't know. I don't even know what that word means. Do you know what that means?
No, I'm gonna look
I assume it means like some kind of blaze of
fevered,
glory.
feverish, or inducing fever.
Okay. Sure, that kind of tracks. That feels like a very red word. I get why we use that all the time.
Well, hold on. Google's telling me that it's only with 1 R. I was always spelling it with 2. No, it's only 1 R. Okay. Apologies to my editors, I guess.
Is it spelled that way on the card as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've just been doing it wrong.
Yes.
I was curious if it was like a magic word, you know what I mean? Where it's like very close, something like Lumimancer, where it feels like it should be Luminmancer.
Yeah.
Luminancer.
Next deck, next step is the screen name. Another Sultai deck, a little bit different than Selfie Sex deck, more counterspells, Archmage's Charm, Cryptic Command, no Noble Hierarch. Still a Lurrus deck with Bauble, Ice Fang, Snapcaster, Tarmogoyf. This deck was pretty popular for like a week.
Yeah, I really want this to be good. I think it's doing some cool stuff, type of Magic I like to play. This was the deck, though, that like when Lurrus went from 3 mana to 6 mana, it was very, very highly impacted. Like, obviously, the difference between 5 and 8 for something like Yorion is very different for the difference between 3 and 6 for Lurrus. I think it's much easier to bear that type of scenario, especially given the type of decks that Yorion was routinely finding its way into. These decks took a big hit when that shifted because they didn't have access to the Mishra's Bauble card advantage engine as early in the game as it really needed to in a lot of scenarios. So you really need your early spells to keep pace. They are sort of doing that here, but Coatl, I'm not sure people adjusted their evaluation of this card enough with the passing of Arkham's Astrolabe. I think it is very important that this gets turned on reliably, and it has become harder. So
yeah, you're not free rolling as many snow permanents, and even this mana base, it's like you have the Triome, which I think you need, but there's Sunken Ruins, Hinterland Harbors. It's like, can we really afford to be doing that? And I guess with Archmage's Charm, that was definitely a problem in this deck. Like casting Charm when you have like Snow Forest, no Swamp, and you don't have the free fixing and everything. So yeah, Coatl, instead of being online on turn 2, is now like maybe a turn 4 card.
Yeah, and that matters when there are very good aggressive decks in the format, all the prowess decks. Like getting that free block was worth a lot, and you're just not getting it a lot of the time now. And I'm not sure that the evaluation of this card has degraded enough with the loss of that effectiveness. Not to say it's a bad card. I still think it has its place. It's just not what it was.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's still fine. It's still playable, but normally it was one of the reasons to be in a deck like this. And now I would hope that players are just like, well, I will play copies of it because I'm in these colors. I already wanted to be in these colors. But right. It still seems like, you start with 4 Ice Fang and then you go from there, which I don't think is the right way to go about it.
Sure.
Next up is my homie Askia playing Boros Prowess, Swiftspear, Soulscar Mage, Lumamancer, 2 copies of Abbot of Carol Keep, which I thought about this, I think, like today or yesterday, just like the comparison of Abbot versus the blue-red Telling Time, Draw Spell, Expressive Iteration.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, yeah, it's pretty similar. Like you think about the decks where Abbot showed up, at least in Modern, and the timing of it and things like that. It's like, yeah, okay, I kind of get it now. And when you start looking at it like that, it's like, well, maybe Abbot is just better because you get this 2/1 prowess body instead of like a card in your hand.
Yeah, and when decks are set up to leverage that body so effectively, if you're going as far as playing Crash Through, I think there's a very good argument that Abbot is actually the card you want there.
Yeah, and I mean, this deck is playing 2 Abbots, 3 light up the stage, so not maxing like 4 and 4 of those because they're certainly pretty awkward together. But yeah, it just kind of goes to show the conversation we had earlier.
These decks are so impressive for their capacity to both be hyper aggressive and to rebuild so well. All the different pieces they're able to use to generate card advantage, be it Lurrus plus Bauble or light up the stage. They just do things that these decks historically have not been able to do. They feel totally different at this stage of the game.
Yeah, and you're just threatening like a bunch of damage, from turn 2 on. So These decks are certainly really strong. I just think that these decks have outmoded Burn at this point.
I am inclined to agree. You could also probably sell me on the idea that there are metagames for both. Like if decks are just better at answering creatures, if it's a fatal push format, then you could talk me into Burn. But I think that the metagame is so unsettled at this point that I'm mostly making my choices in a vacuum when I'm trying to enter these leagues. And in a vacuum, I think your assessment is good.
Well, it's not like Burn actually wants to play against fatal push decks either, necessarily.
Sure.
I mean,
sure.
Things like Jund are typically very good, but certainly it can skew away from that if they're actually respecting you a lot.
Yeah.
So
fair enough.
Maybe at that point you're just like, well, just don't play these medium 1-mana creatures and just play Tron or something.
Just play Tron. That's always the correct answer. And D Green seems to know that.
Yeah. I hadn't scrolled down yet, but yeah. D Green, 16, mono green Tron, nothing new.
Nothing new.
Cool.
Next.
Little Police Boy, Jund. 2 Croxa, 1 Nihil Spellbomb, some Seasoned Pyromancers, a couple of Dreadbores. Yep.
Not a lot to report. Still Jund. Snook will be happy to see this in the list, but that's all we got.
Boyle in the sideboard. I still don't like Boyle.
Just like viscerally, or don't like it in this particular deck?
Well, it started as a thing that people were doing against Dryad decks.
Right.
Which I think is just utter nonsense. And there's not a ton of those decks left, nor are there a ton of decks that Boyle on its face is just good against. So I don't know.
2 Boils feels like a lot of slots in your modern Jund sideboard where you need to be able to cover a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's like 2 Fulminator Mages, 2 Ashiok, so you're already dedicating cards to those Dryad Primeval Titan decks. And yeah, I feel like you'd be better off solidifying with more copies of either of those than playing Boyle.
No argument here.
Jorg or J-Org, Mono Brown Eldrazi.
Can't find a new card for us to comment on, so I think that means this will be yet another Eldrazi list show for us.
MTGO Bazaar 8 Mill.
Nothing fresh to report here either. Still doing the same mill stuff. I still think this deck is like probably under-respected, but I am not going to play it, so I'm not going to be the one who garners any respect.
There are a lot of Eldrazi's and like Gaea's Blessings in people's sideboards, so I think that they're doing like the bare minimum amount of work to respect it.
Okay. Is that enough? Is that all it takes to kind of push this out?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
It helps, you know, it lessens their ability to actually just goldfish you. They need to find something else to like actually deal with that card, but I really don't think it's enough.
All right.
If you're racing, like you're a pretty fast deck, and you think that having that card in your deck will make it so that you can like win the race against them before they can fully set up, then cool. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, but just thinking that's going to be your answer it's not going to hold.
Yeah, if you're like a do nothing control deck, it's like, yeah, they're going to find an answer to that eventually. It doesn't really matter.
Yep.
Kajimi, Azorius Control. This has, you know, no Flagstone shenanigans, no Stoneforge Mystics, not even like a lot of charms in it or anything. Like
about as chalk as you can play this particular archetype, besides the one Circle of Protection red in the sideboard. Love seeing a COP, the bane of every Magic player's existence in 1994 and 1995, because whoever your like one person you knew who played Magic was, they'd always load their deck up with Circle of Protections against you. And
yeah, because you were only playing one color, let's be real.
Obviously, yeah. And then you had to find some way around it. And if you happened to be foolish enough to be the red mage, COP red was just going to end your Magic career basically on the spot.
Yeah, I think everyone is kind of ready for Core Firewalker at this point. So Cop Red, it's like, it makes sense. You know, it's this thing that is in theory good against them that doesn't get dismembered or whatever, but at the same time, it's very mana intensive and they're threatening to kill you on like turn 3, turn 4. You don't really have, you know, all the mana up to be able to utilize this a bunch. So it's still kind of sketchy to me.
Feels a little on the slow side, but gotta give the props anyway anytime I see a COP red.
Yeah, I wonder when the last time a COP cashed a modern like daily event or challenge or anything.
That's an interesting question. And when that becomes a prevalent thing, I guess I'll pack what my Thought Lace is. What lace will I need? Chaos Lace.
Dude, I don't
would
know.
Just change it to red. Life Lace, we could turn it to green. Death Lace, shift it to black. Pure Lace would be to shift it to white. I am so... Let me tell you something. If I needed to like find my car keys right now, I couldn't. There's just no chance. My life's in complete disarray, but I was just able to pull out all 5 laces from my memory banks almost instantly.
What about Moonlace?
The colorless one. Yeah, great point. I feel almost bad for disrespecting Moonlace like that. Because if I'm going to devote this much of my brain wrinkles to knowing these laces, I should probably get the full set.
Oh, this just is target spell or permanent becomes colorless. It doesn't actually change the wording on it.
Oh, a very inferior lace, not the power card that all the other laces
clearly inferior.
Are. Yeah, very a little disappointing there.
Brian, tell me about this next deck in depth.
This is clearly one of the finest decks to ever grace Modern's hallowed halls. This is the 80 card version of Mono Blue Tron.
No,
which
Blue White Tron.
Fine. It's Blue White Tron.
Gifts.
That's fine. Yeah. All right. I've done this before. I did this years ago. It wasn't good enough then. It's definitely not good enough now. But it's a lot of fun. Maybe the most fun you can have playing Magic is to play a little blue-white Tron. And you have been a blue-white Tron player in the past. I have stolen your blue-white Tron decks in the past, long past, and often did quite well with them. And one of the big breakthroughs back in the day was adding the Gifts Ungiven Unburial Rights package, where you just gifts for 2 cards, and then you get to reanimate whatever it is you chose. And a lot of times it would be Iona to lock out the game. Against creature decks, you get Elish Norn. All of those options are present here, including just being able to eventually hardcast your Emrakul, the Promised End. So if I could do this in good faith and like really believe I was participating in the game, I would almost certainly do so. I legitimately used to love playing this deck, but I can't even talk myself into this at this point. I'm not going to try and talk you into it.
I got 9th at GP Hoth.
Mm-hmm. Lincoln, Nebraska, right?
Yeah, maybe it was 10th or something. Luis top 8'd or top 4 of the tournament. We were both playing pretty similar blue-white Tron decks. His was much worse because he clunked it up. He did the Luis thing, just like added 7 more Celestial Colonnades or whatever. Mm-hmm. Just things that we would like fervently argue about. I think Josh Cho won I think it was his first PTQ. It was either his, it had to have been his first, right? Because like he queued for his second PT off of that Pro Tour. Yeah, I don't know. I played this in Grand Prix when you could play Deathrite Shaman and Bloodbraid Elf and Jund. So maybe that was not very smart, but
no, maybe not.
I think that there was a period where I was the world's best blue-white Tron player.
Wow. Look at the hubris of you just declaring yourself to be the epitome of a blue-white Tron player.
I'm trying to think of an analog where you're just like, I am the world's best X, where it just like, it really paints you in an unfavorable light. I am the world's most toxic rager on Xbox Live or whatever. It's like, it's not really something you should be admitting. Yeah, that was basically me. But seeing this it makes me feel things. They're not all good things. Happy memories for sure, but this deck also has like no new cards. Like the new thing about it is that you're playing Omen of the Sea and Yorion, which means that you get to cram every single Gifts Ungiven package you could possibly want into your deck list, which again is not a good thing.
All of those nonsense cards.
Back in the day, it was interesting because it was like, do I play any threats main? What's my removal suite? Do I try to set up Mindslaver? Do I just go with the Reanimator package? You could do like an Ugin package too, with Haven of the Spirit Dragon and stuff. And I guess, this deck has Ugin, but no Haven. So I guess it can't really get that 100% of the time. But it's just like, you don't want to do this. It was all about like picking and choosing what package you wanted.
Discretion is usually the better part of valor. I have one final blue-white Tron story that I find amusing.
Please
I don't know if anyone else will.
Please hit me.
I remember a PTQ that I traveled with I traveled with Ben Lundquist too. And Ben Lundquist, really great Magic player, great deck builder. Now, I believe is still WotC staff these days.
Yeah. Love Ben.
We were both playing blue-white Tron.
I'm sorry.
At this PTQ. And I think it was Dave Shields we were talking with about the deck, who was also playing it, because we had all like kind of independently come to the place. And I think this almost perfectly corresponds temporally with GP Hoth. It might have been the same weekend. I'm not 100% on that, but it was very, very close in time to that. And we're all basically before the tournament bouncing ideas off each other. And we're like, what about this card? What about this card? And then someone finds Annex, which is you control target land. Blue 2, I think you control target land.
Correct. Aura.
And I don't know if it was Ben or Dave, but they're like, yeah, I think I'm going to play Annex. And basically, as soon as they make the decision to play Annex, the rest of us are priced into playing Annex because we can never beat them under any circumstances. So us 3 idiots are now in this tournament with 3 copies of Annex each in the sideboard of our blue-white Tron deck. Who are we targeting? I'm not really sure. Like I know my other buddy.
Each other.
Basically. I know my other buddy, Matty Gem, was there and ultimately top-aided with like Is it Tron, which was also big in that moment? It was like Through the Breach Tron that some people were playing, and maybe there are a few copies of that around. But basically, we all just metagamed against each other and gave up most of our sideboard slots. Ben still made the finals, but I think lost in the finals to like Jund, if I remember correctly. I feel like there was Jund stuff going on.
Yeah, Jund was not an easy matchup. For whatever reason, in Modern, I'm always like, all right, this deck is like okay, but really bad against Jund also, which is not a good combination of things, especially back in like Jund's heyday, you know?
Right. It's not good to put your Tron deck together and be like, yeah, I'm soft to Jund. Like something has gone wrong in that moment, and you have to question all of your life decisions.
I mean, blue-white is not like turn 3 Karn, right?
No.
It was always kind of bad against Jund because the things that you're trying to set up often involve like gifts and using the graveyard, and they could obviously pick apart that stuff pretty easily. But I don't know. There were some games where you just like remand their spell and repeal their spell and like thirst for knowledge, and you just annihilate them. Or like if you naturally Tron up on turn 3, like it didn't happen every game. It happened like 20% of the time or whatever. Then you felt like a god, and then it was awesome.
Yeah, you think you would be able to outsize them in most instances, though. But also, I'm going to point out that this particular list we're looking at, I don't think this was the case with our list. I'm not 100% sure. I would have to go back in time. There's no Karns in the list we're looking at right now. So even if you go ahead and set up your turn 3 Tron, you haven't done anything. Like there's actually nothing you can do with that. I'm pretty sure the list I was playing at least some number of Karns. I know it was there. I would be kind of shocked if I didn't have a lot.
I wasn't. I think that some people did, but I didn't really agree with it.
Okay.
All right.
I remember part of Ben's loss in the finals was he misplayed his Karn. And then after the match, I was like, did you think about doing this with the Karn? And he's like, I didn't really know what the card did. And I forgot it did that. And that was the reason he lost.
All right. So I searched for Ben Lundquist, Blue-White Tron. And the only thing that comes up is like his GP finals or win or whatever with Blue-Green Tron.
Okay, yeah, that
finals.
Predates that.
Yep. Yeah, by like 2 or 3 years. So.
Yep.
Oh,
yeah, well. it was PTQ only, I'm sure, so probably didn't get captured by.
Some of those lists got posted. I don't know.
Occasionally they'd end up on there, but yeah, shame that one is lost to time.
Is it?
Maybe not.
Volkswagen, Gruul, land disruption.
Volkswagen is always doing this, right? This is what we see them doing every time.
I don't know. I don't pay attention to these decks.
You know everyone's name. How do you not pay attention to this?
Because I'm never like, oh yeah, shout outs to the Gruul land destruction player, you know?
Okay, fair enough.
Silent Song, As Foretold, Electro Dominance. And I really hate that these decks do this, but it's like Restore Balance, Crashing Footfalls, Ancestral Vision, a little bit of everything, you know?
Yeah, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of nothing for us to talk about because we've done this deck to death.
Not even any Prismari commands. What are you doing?
It seems like a good ad.
Eclipse, 4343, Jeskai Control, Terminus. I see Omen of the Sea to go with Terminus. Okay, that kind of makes sense. Still only 60 cards, though. So 60 card Omen of the Sea deck.
Yeah, not a Yorion to be found anywhere, which is wrong. I don't think you're supposed to play Omen of the Sea in that scenario.
Well, I mean, what if you decide you really want to play Terminus?
Aren't there better ways to do this?
Not really.
What did we use? There was something we were doing with Terminus for a period of time.
Mystic
Probably
Sanctuary.
Something that's banned at this point. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, banned as hell.
Something we were up to.
Really banned.
Fair enough.
Super banned.
Fair enough. Yep.
Giovanni MF, Death Shadow, Hex Drinker, Scourge of the Skyclaves, Tarmogoyf, a lot of big creatures. Bauble, Lurrus, etc.
Yep. Pretty standard. A little Team of Battle Rage action. Looks fine.
Vida Tinha. This is just one of those things where it's like, is this one word? Is this supposed to be 2 words? If it is, I don't know where the space is.
Vitatina.
09
is my reading of this particular name.
Yawgmoth Combo.
I feel like this got a new card that I had my eye on, but there's nothing here. This is the old Yawgmoth deck. Wasn't there something printed recently that seemed like a reasonable inclusion in this?
Don't know.
Okay.
Don't really pay attention.
Not tracking
to this.
That one.
Don't pay attention to this. I do love a Yawgmoth, obviously.
Yeah.
But I don't know. This deck is never. it's just like the creature combo decks, man. Like occasionally I recognize like, yes, this is good in this moment. And then getting me over that hump to actually play it is a lot harder. And so I just haven't really paid attention to this. I do recognize that at this point, it's kind of like a well-tuned machine. It is pretty solid, but there's also like Heliod stuff going on.
Right. That was going to be my point. Is I think there does exist a better version of this right now. So I have no real problem with this deck. I think it's fine. But in this moment, there's just a better way to do it.
AC Xeno, Mono Red, Obosh.
Yeah, this deck is the same. Not really any changes here. Nothing to report.
Like it's got Blood Moon and Bone Crusher, so it's like a little bit bigger. I'm just not sure that that's super relevant compared to just trying to prowess people, you know?
Yeah, the people who like Obosh really like it. They'll tell you that it is a huge difference maker. I have never quite bought that, and maybe in its oldest form it was, but the cost is so huge here, and you're a very, very lean deck, your 20 land deck. So I just don't think it really comes up as often as people want you to believe.
Yeah, agreed. Melton, Elvish Reclaimer, Dry to the Elysian Grove, Bring to Light, Scapeshift. I wrote about this like post-ban before people added the creatures to it. Like I like Bring to Light, Scapeshift. This one also has Cleansing Wildfire, Flagstones, which makes sense because you're doing Elvish Reclaimer stuff. And I think the creatures are like a pretty good addition. You obviously don't have the like Cryptic Command sort of stuff to solidify you against combo, but you get a lot faster, it seems like.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I don't know. This is cool to me. This deck has also been doing really well. It won one of the challenges, I think, last week.
Yeah, I think I just prefer the interaction and the speed bumps that the creatures add to the mix, like getting your Elvish Reclaimer big early on and just having those early blockers against the very, very aggressive decks that are present in the format right now. I'd like to set up a little bit better here, and I see why this is finding some success presently.
Yep. Gershi, 80 card, Bring to Light, Niv Mizzet, 4 copies of Omnath, which is kind of standard in these lists now, which is just kind of wild to me. I don't know. It's also wild that it's like Teferi, Rain and 6, Kaya's Guile. There's like, Vanishing Verse now. Just like all the new gold cards are showing up in this archetype.
Yeah, it seems to pick up, a little bit here, a little bit there, every single set. And I guess that makes sense where you have such an efficient search engine. Any color pairs you see can often offer something new to your Niv Mizzets. And I do think like Vanishing Verse is a good card here. It doesn't move the needle for me, but basically every set this deck's probably only going to get better and better unless something is banned, and certainly it is still dealing with the fallout of the Arkham's Astrolabe ban, but I think it has rebounded in a pretty real way. It seems like the mana is completely fine here, and if you still believe that setting up these very, very value intensive battlefields is the way to go, then nothing has really changed for me as far as this deck goes.
Yeah, it fits in a bad spot to me on the mid-range scale, but that's like my only gripe against it. Okay.
What do you see like kind of outscaling it, going under? I do think it doesn't do quite enough to keep up with the really aggressive decks. Do you think it doesn't outsize the other mid-range approaches?
Well, anything that's trying to Valakut you or Tron you is going to be able to go over the top. So you're really focusing in on a very specific window of just like, I'm going to beat up on Jund, but like still probably lose the same stuff that Jund does,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very fair knock and a very real one.
Yeah. Tukanoxos, another Gruul Valakut deck. This one doing Through the Breach stuff. I'm more sold on the Transmogrify creativity stuff than I am this now, because that's just like a 1-card combo, fetch into Dwarven Mine. That's kind of a given. You're going to have that a lot of the time, and then you just need to draw the Transmogrify and have it work out, of course, whereas Through the Breach is just like, Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, whatever, doesn't do anything against this. So I see the pros and cons for both, but I tend to like the Transmogrify stuff better now.
Okay. I will be Transmogrifying as well. I see the appeal.
Mean Fanny Pack. Yorion, Orzhov, Stoneforge Mystic, Dark Confidant, Skyclave Apparition, Liliana the Veil. Is this doing anything for you?
These are all Magic cards that you are allowed to register in Modern, and they were all one-time, very powerful Magic cards.
Like in 2021?
No, not in 2021. Some period before that, they were quite good. Lingering Souls, one of the best Magic cards in both Modern and Legacy for a period.
I purposefully left that one off the list. I wasn't like, ooh, Lingering Souls, are you excited? Because,
that is maybe the one reason to get excited here. I like playing decks like this, but when I do so, I don't expect to win. So
I wouldn't mind seeing Lingering Souls in Historic.
Sure, that's a good addition. I like that. I don't even know that it is particularly good there, but like if you're going to put Brainstorm, that's the thing once you put Brainstorm is like, just do whatever you want. Who cares? If people like Lingering Souls, let them play with it.
Yeah. LJEX. I see this deck show up and I don't know why. Grixis Lurrus Companion with Sprite Dragon, Snapcaster Mage, and a bunch of control elements. Like, how do you really justify putting Sprite Dragon and things like Into the Story in the same deck? Like, this is your Grixis Tarmogoyf, I guess, but it's really bad at that.
One of the best features of Tarmogoyf is how well it plays defense for you, and it lets you go both ways. Sprite Dragon just doesn't do that unless you're able to invest in it for a long time. And
but at that point, like, you probably hit them a few times and you could probably just kill them. So
sure,
even then,
yeah, it really only goes in one direction. And I get your puzzlement here. It seems like there's a lot of conflicting parts to this deck.
So I get that there aren't a lot of good options, and the things that you would normally play, it's like, oh, well, maybe this deck could play a couple Tassigers. Well, you can't if you're playing Lurrus. So you have decided that Lurrus Bauble with like Kolagon's Command or whatever is more important than having a big win condition. So like this is the thing that you want. And I don't think that anyone's really happy with playing Sprite Dragon. I can't imagine that that's the case. They're just like, yeah, this is the perfect card for this deck. I mean, it does do well against combo-y sort of setups where it's like, this is a real clock that will kill them. But I don't know. I feel like there should be something better, but maybe there just isn't.
Yeah, you want it to be like Delver of Secrets, I think. And we know that Delver of Secrets doesn't get the job done in Modern. That is also the top inclusion on my add to historic list. It's not going to be good enough. I know that. Even with Brainstorm, I don't think it's going to be good enough. But like, just let me do it. Let me waste my wild cards and try a little Delver of Secrets.
I don't know, man.
Make it a mythic. I'll give you my mythic wild cards. I don't even care.
You mean rare? The rare ones are more valuable still, right?
I've run out of mythics. I know a lot of people report the opposite, but for whatever reason, I have a hard time keeping mythics in stock. I think I build more bad decks built around mythics, and that's why I'm always short on them.
Yeah, fair. I mean, going through like Brainstorm Looting, Abundant Harvest, stuff like that, made me run out of rares this time around. But
sure. Yep.
I don't know. I think Delver with Brainstorm for sure would help its cause in Historic, but even like Seagate Restoration, it's like, all right, that helps a lot. So
yep.
I think it would get there. Mono Blue's already close. Like they're more of like curiosity decks than anything, but I think that would still be good. And you have Memory Labs.
Do you think it gets there in a bad way?
Well, so a deck like that is going to serve to cause churn, which is good, but it's like, any mid-range deck or combo deck is going to get beat up by them, and then mono red is going to clown you, and then things will just cycle through, right? So it's never going to be dominant, I don't think, but it will be good.
It feels like it adds a little bit of rhyme and reason to any format is present and able to be a limiter on the format.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I wrote this in my article. This was just like the header. It's just like, I'm going to stop asking questions about Historic. And I think that...
I think that's fine.
I think that I'm just completely off. Well, I'm certainly off trying to puzzle out like what the rationale is and what the roadmap looks like. And I'm just like, whatever. If things get added to it, then I will treat it like a thing that exists. But I'm never going to be like, oh, what should be banned, or will this card like ever be added to the format? It's like, yeah, Delver will probably be added alongside, the Moxes or whatever. I don't know.
It sounds like you have taken a very rational approach to this format, and I support you in doing
more defeatist than anything. I'm just like, I just give up.
Okay.
But it is what it is. By Dawn Virus. More Gruul. Gruul land destruction. Gruul
we
smash.
Did this deck already. I refuse to believe that we aren't somehow going backwards.
Last deck, Raging Tilt Monster, 80 card, Kiki Chord. Wait, Yep. Okay. 4 Kikis, 4 Chords, 4 Ephemerates.
I'm out of words, Gerry. I reached for something. I'm glad we're doing this live because like it feels like when we do these large deck dump shows, it's something that we could like cobble together and do some editing with and take breaks and breathe for a moment.
In
and
theory,
I'm
we never
glad,
do those things.
I know. I'm glad that our patrons were able to witness just the unfiltered nonsense that goes into doing these long deck dumps and how your brain just turns to mush as you look through modern deck after modern deck, sometimes seemingly built with no logic whatsoever. They just exist. Modern decks just exist sometimes. And you try and puzzle and make a narrative about it and like share some bit of wisdom because that's what we do when we make a podcast, and you just reach for it. And there's nothing there by the time you get to the Kiki Chord list at the end. It's just empty.
The funny thing is, like, I could talk about a lot of these decks where I'm just like, yep, this is the deck that exists. Moving on. I could harp on them for a while, but I don't know. We also just did it to our cast, so.
Yeah, when we try and keep it brief, we still fail at that goal. But hopefully we did something to further increase your understanding of the modern format. I feel like we just kind of went around in circles, bizarre mono blue Tron based circles for 2 hours. But people seem to like it. If you hate it, I understand. That's fine. I don't blame you at all.
We could just make up shit to talk about next week for historic. I mean, we could also put in a bunch of work and make it structured, and that's what I'm leaning towards. But if people are just like, just do historic garbage instead of modern every time, we'll happily do that.
I agree with that, especially when things are weird and interesting as they are right now. I also think there's going to be good standard stuff to talk about come next week. I feel like we'll start to see our first rays of light into a new format, or we can finally just like put that to bed and be like, this is what we're dealing with. It's just kind of a rehash. Let's figure out how to start working on that.
Yeah, everyone just put it down for a month until the PTQ happens, and then we'll pick it up then, and then just go back to historic again.
Works for me.
Everyone just play rogues. Who cares? I'm actually surprised there weren't a lot of Prismari commands in these deck lists specifically. Like, I've seen it show up in a decent amount of places, mostly in just weird Izzet decks, like not really showing up in like Grixis or Teamer or anything. For the most part, Kolagon's command kind of has you covered, or like even stretching for Archmage's command and stuff. But that is a solid card that has mostly impressed me in a bunch of different formats.
I agree. I've enjoyed it. I've talked a bunch about my Izzet Dragons approach in Standard thus far. Prismari command has been a big part of that. Quite good. I think all the modes on it are they play better than they read a lot of the time. It's funny because I sort of hated Izzet Charms, draw 2, discard 2, but Standard feels a little different in that you just have so many resources to work with a lot of the time that you're looking for something more specific. And then
you're getting something else out of it too.
Yeah, the mode that I've really appreciated more than anything else is the treasure mode, quite frankly. Like being able to ramp with your removal spell or your filtration spell. It makes a difference, and it opens up a lot of really good turn 4s when you're playing with Goldspan Dragon, and those games tend to snowball really hard too. So I think that's another card that certainly has its place in Standard, and we're going to see more and more of it. And like you mentioned, it's 100% modern applicable.
So I looked at a lot of the commands as like, one of these things is almost certainly going to be good a lot of the time. And then the other thing that you choose is just going to, you could take it or leave it. And that didn't really line up with a lot of their mana costs. And in the case of Prismari command, it making a treasure means that it's like the 5th command mode where it's like you shock something and this costs 1 less.
Yep.
And I think that's, I don't know, just like confusing but interesting, and has made the card feel a lot better, where you want to shock something for 2 mana while also doing something else on this turn, or you're using it to ramp into Goldspan Dragon, or you have other treasure synergies or whatever. It's like, yeah, you are getting removal spell plus like this very middling thing, but it gives a lot of flexibility to the card. And, that's a card that has 4 modes already. It's like it has 10 modes now.
Yeah, and it is a middling thing, like abstractly. +1 mana isn't all that meaningful, but also +1 mana can be a break point. It can be the difference between winning and losing. It's why something like Desperate Ritual is an extremely powerful Magic card, right? Like if you're able to move up that scale, if you're able to move up your time frame by an entire turn, then it becomes Time Walk in that instance. And sometimes you only need one Time Walk to close out the game. And I've found a lot of scenarios where +1 mana has mattered a lot in decks that like seemingly shouldn't have access to it. And that's one of the reasons why I've really liked the instant Magma Opus type effects where you're able to discard those cards. It just gives so much flexibility to your game plan. The other thing I'll note about these cards too is that they all go face. And adding that reach to your game plan, also a pretty big game changer. Like you find yourself in a lot of scenarios where you would just be closed out before. And you're like, I'll just burn you out. That's fine. I can find 9 points of damage over the next 2 turns and win the game that way. So it's been a cool change to see.
Yeah, I mean, it also, in standard at least, in combination with Goldspan Dragon, does snowball really hard too. If you like treasure out the Goldspan Dragon a turn earlier, Goldspan makes a treasure, you untap with a bunch of mana and stuff like that. So yeah, the context surrounding that card was definitely not apparent to me when I first read it. But now I'm just this card is great.
Yep, I'm with you.
I think that is one of the cards that I ordered from the set.
Nice, good work. That was a good choice.
It's just like, I don't know, it's in the realm of things that I will likely play at some point, you know?
Is it too late? Did I miss the window on getting a good deal on these, or should I be buying them right now?
I'm actually checking right now. They were just cheap, so I don't think that's ever going to be super expensive.
Well, I'm assuming there's some ridiculous fancy version I can waste my money on, right?
Well, yeah, that's true. So Star City has them at 3, but they're also sold out. Extended arts are 5, foil extended arts are 10, but everything is sold out, so who knows?
10 is kind of like, I'm feeling that. I'm feeling an extended foil for 10. I think I could place a little order here.
They're sold out, man.
At StarCityGames.com, the finest home for all Magic the Gathering cards, where I buy all my Magic cards. Yes, you're right. I guess I'll have to wait.
I don't know. Goldfish is saying that the extended art foil ones are 12. So yeah, you can still get a good deal. They're not expensive.
I got a good deal. I'll tell you where to get a good deal after we finish the show.
Sure. All right.
Game.
Good luck.